10 years after leaving the only man she ever loved, Dr. Teresa Colombo has built a quiet life healing children while burying a love that never truly died. But when Salvatore Greco, the ruthless Mafia king she thought she'd left behind, appears on her doorstep, begging her to save the little girl he believes is his daughter, the past comes crashing back. As a desperate battle against leukemia unfolds, long-buried lies, heartbreaking betrayals, and a truth no one could have imagined begin to surface, revealing that the child fighting for her life may be the key to destroying everything, or finally bringing two broken hearts home. You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Dark Romance Stories channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. This content is the property of Dark Romance Stories. Please do not copy or re-upload it in any form. Philadelphia, October 2015. The rain came sideways against the windows of her row house on Pine Street, and Teresa Colombo sat at her grandmother's writing desk with a fountain pen she only used once a year. She had a ritual now. Every October, on the anniversary of the night she walked away from him, she poured a single glass of the Montepulciano her father used to keep in the cellar, and she wrote a letter she would never send. Dear Sal, it has been 1 year. I told myself I wouldn't count, but I am a woman who counts things for a living. White blood cells, heartbeats per minute, the number of breaths a frightened 4-year-old takes when I press the cold bell of my stethoscope to her chest. So of course I counted. 365 days since I closed the door of your car and did not look back, though every muscle in my body was screaming at me to turn around. She paused. The pen hovered. Outside, a car passed, slow and black through the wet street, and for one absurd second her heart clenched. Him. Before the car turned the corner and was gone. It was never him. He had promised her that. If you leave, I won't chase you, Teresa. I love you too much to drag you into the dark with me. It was the cruelest promise anyone had ever made her, because he had kept it. I finished my residency. Did I tell you I would? I don't remember what I told you that last night. I remember your hands and the sound of the ocean, and how you kept saying my name like it was a prayer you weren't sure God would answer. I remember thinking, this is the last time. And I remember hating myself for how much I wanted it to not be. I'm a pediatrician now, Sal. Can you imagine? The girl who fainted in anatomy lab. I have a practice near Rittenhouse. Small, honest. Nobody's blood on the floor of my waiting room, but the ordinary kind. Scraped knees, bloody noses, the everyday wounds of childhood. I chose it on purpose. I wanted a life where the worst thing that happened was a fever that broke by morning. Teresa set the pen down and pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes. She had met Salvatore Greco in the second week of her sophomore year at Villanova, in the reading room of Falvey Library, where he had been sitting with a copy of Dante he clearly wasn't reading, watching her instead. He was not a student. She learned that later. He was 23, already broad through the shoulders in the way of men who had done real work, with a stillness to him that made the boys around them look like puppies. When he finally spoke, it was to tell her she had underlined the wrong passage in Purgatorio. There's no wrong passage, she'd said. There is if you're looking for the one about being forgiven, he'd answered, and she had been lost from that moment, though it took her 3 years to understand how completely. He'd been gentle with her, in a way that seemed impossible for a man built like a door. He brought her espresso he made himself in a battered little mocha pot, and he read to her, and he never once raised his voice. She had known, of course, in the vague way that everyone in South Philly knew things, that the Greco name meant something. But knowing a name and knowing a man are different countries, and she had lived happily in the second one for 3 years, telling herself the rumours belonged to a different family entirely. Then she had seen the thing she could not unsee. I still dream about the warehouse, she wrote now, the pen moving before she'd decided to let it. You don't know I saw. I never told you what I saw. I've carried it like a stone in my mouth for a year, and I can't say it even to a piece of paper I'm going to burn. But I saw enough to know that the man reading me Dante and the man in that building were the same man, and that I could love only one of them and survive. So I left, and you let me, and I will never forgive either of us. She stopped writing because her hand had begun to shake. Down the block, the bells of St. Rita's rang the hour. 8 o'clock, dark already, the city sinking into its wet October evening. Teresa poured a second finger of wine, which she never did, and drank it, looking at the photograph she kept in the desk drawer instead of on the wall. The two of them on the boardwalk at Ocean City, his arm around her, his mouth against her hair, both of them squinting into a sun that had set 9 years ago. She had told exactly no one the truth about why she and Salvatore Greco had ended. Her mother believed he had cheated. Her colleagues believed there had never been a Salvatore at all, that Dr. Colombo was simply married to her work, wed to her sick children, too devoted to the small, failing bodies in her care to make room for a man. Let them believe it. It was easier than the truth, which was that she had loved a killer, and the loving had not stopped when the leaving did. I heard you took over, she wrote, after your father. I don't ask about you. I've trained everyone I know not to say your name, but the city talks, and I heard. Salvatore Greco, they call you now, not Sal, not the boy who couldn't parallel park. They say you're colder than your father ever was. They say the Vince crew tried to move on your territory last spring and simply stopped existing. They say a great many things, and I lie awake and try to decide which are true, and I hate that I hope none of them are, because a woman who hopes that is a woman who is still in love. I'm not going to send this. I never do. I'm going to put it in the cedar box with the others. No, there are no others yet. This is the first. And next October I'll write another one. And the year after that, until enough of them stack up that I can finally read them and understand what happened to my life. I have a good life, Sal. I want you to know that, even though you never will. My patients love me. I have friends. There is a cardiologist named David who takes me to the symphony and holds my coat and asks nothing of me. And I let him, because it is restful to be with a man who has never once frightened me. But I have never once in his company forgotten to breathe. You ruined me for restful. That's the truth I can write down. You made restful feel like drowning slowly instead of quickly. The rain thickened. She heard it change register on the glass, the fat autumn drops becoming a hiss. Teresa folded the letter along a crease she pressed hard with her thumbnail, the way her grandmother had taught her to fold linens, and she wrote his name on the front, Salvatore, and underneath it, in smaller letters, the truth of the thing, not to be sent. Then she opened the cedar box her father had made her when she graduated medical school, the one that still smelled of the shavings from his workshop, and she laid the letter inside on the empty red velvet, and she closed the lid. One letter, a whole year folded into a single page. She turned off the desk lamp and sat a while in the dark, listening to the storm, her wineglass empty, and her heart, as always, 3 years behind her body. Still in a car, on a September night, still reaching for a door handle, still not turning around. Across the city, in a penthouse above the Delaware, where the rain looked like static on a dead channel, a man she would not see for a decade stood at a window with a glass of the same wine, thinking about a girl who underlined the wrong passages in Dante, not knowing, not for years yet, that on the last night he had held her, they had made something that would one day bring her back to him, and break them both apart, and put them back together in a shape neither of them could have survived guessing. From the Diary of Teresa Colombo, March 2016. I saw him today. Not him, I want to be precise, because imprecision is how a woman like me loses her mind. I saw his name. It was in the Inquirer, below the fold, a photograph taken outside the federal courthouse. Greco acquitted, the headline said, and there he was, in a charcoal suit that cost more than my car, flanked by lawyers, his face turned 3/4 away, as though even the camera were a witness he intended to intimidate. 10 years. He has aged into himself the way certain men do, the softness of the boy burned off, the bones of the man standing out beneath. I sat in my office between patients and stared at 3 inches of newsprint for 11 minutes. I timed it. Then I folded the paper so his face was inside, and I saw a child with an ear infection, and I did not fall apart. And I count that as a victory. They could not make anything stick. Of course they couldn't. The witness recanted. The witness always recants, or vanishes, or is found in the river with his pockets full of the particular kind of silence that follows the Greco name around like a dog. I keep a folder now. This is a thing I have not admitted even to this diary until tonight. A manila folder in the bottom drawer of the desk at home, and in it I put the clippings. Not because I want them, because throwing them away feels like throwing away pieces of a man I promised myself I'd forgotten. And I am not, it turns out, a woman capable of that particular lie. David asked me to marry him last week. I have not written that down either. He did it beautifully. A table at Vetri, the ring in a box the colour of a robin's egg, his kind cardiologist's hands not quite steady. He is 51, and divorced, and gentle, and he would never, in 10,000 years, let anyone hurt me. He is everything a sane woman would run toward. I told him I needed time. He said, "Take all you need," because he is a good man, and good men wait. And that is precisely the problem. Sal never waited for anything in his life. Sal took. Sal looked at me across a library table and decided, and I have spent 9 years discovering that being decided about is a drug for which there is no substitute. I am ashamed of that sentence. I'm leaving it in. From an unsent letter, Teresa to Sal, October 2016. Dear Sal, 2 years. I almost married someone this year. I want you to know that wherever you are, because I want you to have to imagine it, Me in white, some other man lifting the veil. I want it to cost you something, even though you'll never know, even though the wanting is childish. I have decided that unsent letters are the only place a grown woman is permitted to be a child. I didn't do it. I gave him back the ring in April. He cried, and I did not. And I understood in that moment that I am a colder person than the world believes, and that you did that to me. Or maybe you only revealed it. Maybe the coldness was always mine, and you were simply the only man who ever matched it. They acquitted you. I saw. I keep a folder. There, I've confessed it to paper. I read every word they print about you, and I ration it out to myself like insulin. The Vincetti thing was you, wasn't it? Don't answer. You can't answer. That's the beauty of these letters, Sal. I get to ask you everything, and you get to stay the man I need you to be, which is silent, and far away, and mine. I saw a little boy today with leukemia. He is 6. He held my hand while we talked about the port they're going to put in his chest, and he asked me if it would hurt, and I lied to him, gently, the way you lie to children. And afterward I went into the supply closet, and I cried for 11 minutes. The same 11, always 11, I don't know why. And it was not entirely about the boy. It is never entirely about the patient. That is a secret they don't teach you in medical school. Sometimes the child's pain unlocks a door in you, and everything you've stored behind it comes flooding out. I wonder if you have children. The thought arrives sometimes at 3 in the morning like an intruder. Some woman in a house in Chestnut Hill, some dark-eyed babies with your stillness in them. It shouldn't hurt. We ended a lifetime ago. But I imagine you reading Dante to a child who is not mine, and I have to sit up and turn on the light. You won't have children. Men like you don't. Children are a vulnerability. And you told me once, in the only truly honest thing you ever said about your work, that you had spent your whole life closing off vulnerabilities the way a submarine closes off flooding compartments. Seal it, save the rest of the ship. Don't think about the men you left behind the door. I was a compartment you sealed. I've made my peace with it. I write these letters to prove the water's still in there. 2 years. I miss you like a phantom limb, not constantly but predictably, when the weather changes, when I reach for something and the arm that should be there is gone. She sealed that one too, and laid it in the cedar box atop the first, and the red velvet was a little less visible now, and she told herself, as she told herself every year, that this would be the last. It was not the last. There would be 8 more before he came, but that spring she did one thing she had never done. Late one night, 3 glasses of wine past her better judgment, she opened her laptop and typed his name into the search bar. And then she deleted it, letter by letter. S-A-L, backspace, backspace, backspace. Because she was a doctor and a rational woman, and she knew that some wounds heal only if you refuse to keep opening them. And because, in truth, she was afraid of what she'd find, and more afraid of what she'd feel, and most afraid of all that she would find nothing and feel everything anyway. She closed the laptop. She went to bed. She dreamed, as she often did, of a warehouse and a sound she had spent a decade trying to unhear, and woke at 3 a.m. with the light already on because she had learned to leave it burning. Philadelphia, the same years from a different window. Salvatore Greco did not write letters. He was a man who had learned young and hard that anything committed to paper was a rope someone could hang you with. His father had taught him that with a lit cigarette against the back of his hand when he was 11 and had scrawled a girl's phone number on his forearm in ballpoint. Nothing in writing, Salvatore. Nothing they can hold. So he held it all inside instead, in the enormous vault of a man who never forgot anything and never forgave much, and never, not once in 10 years, stopped thinking about a woman who underlined the wrong passages in Dante. He knew where she lived. Of course he knew. He knew the name of the cardiologist she'd nearly married, and he knew the man's home address, and there had been one bad night, in the spring of 2016, when Sal had sat outside that man's house in Society Hill, with the engine off and his hands very still on the wheel, thinking about how easy it would be, how a single phone call would erase the man from Teresa's life the way you'd erase a wrong number, and how she would never know, and how she would go on believing the fellow had simply drifted away. He had not made the call. He had sat there until the sky went grey, and then he had driven home and poured a drink he didn't finish, and he had understood something about himself that he did not like. That the leash he kept on the animal in him had exactly one anchor point, and her name was Teresa Colombo, and if he ever lost it, he would become the thing his father had been, and worse. So he watched from a distance, and he did not interfere, and he told himself, it was love. Maybe it was. The men around him would not have recognized it as love. It looked from the outside exactly like surveillance, but Sal had never learned any other way to hold something precious except to guard it. You're somewhere else again, boss. That was Marco. Marco Greco, his younger brother by 4 years, lounging in the doorway of the penthouse study with the easy grin that made everyone underestimate him, which was precisely why Sal used him for the things that required charm. Marco could talk a union boss out of a strike and a widow out of her late husband's silence in the same afternoon, and leave them both feeling they'd gotten the better of him. He was beautiful in the way their mother had been beautiful, all long lashes and quick warmth, and Sal loved him with the fierce, uncomplicated love of a man who had raised his sibling as much as any parent had. I'm here, Sal said. You're not. You get this look. I've seen it maybe 4 times in 10 years. Marco crossed to the bar cart and poured himself 2 fingers of the good scotch without asking, because he was the one person alive permitted not to ask. It's a woman. It's always been a woman. You going to tell me her name someday, or do I have to keep guessing? No, Sal said, and it was not unkind, only final. And Marco laughed and let it go, the way he let everything go, because that was Marco's gift. He never held on to anything, never grudged, never brooded. It made him restful company for a man like Sal, who held on to everything. If you leave, I won't chase you. He had said that to her in the car, and he had meant it, and keeping his word to her was the only clean thing left in a life full of dirty ones. She thought he'd let her go out of nobility. That was a story she could live with, and he had let her have it. The truth was uglier and simpler. He had let her go because he had looked at his own hands and understood that a man cannot carry a woman like Teresa into a world like his without one of 2 things happening. Either she becomes like him, or she gets used against him. He had seen too many wives become the first, and too many become the second. He would not do that to her. Loving her had made him, for the first time in his life, capable of an act of restraint that felt like tearing out a tendon. What neither of them knew, what he would not learn for a decade in the worst way a man can learn anything, was that on the last night in the beach house at Ocean City with the windows open to the Atlantic, they had made a child. He would have found her. If he had known, nothing on earth could have kept him from her door. He knew that about himself with total certainty, which was why, later, when he finally did know, the not having known would sit in his chest like a swallowed blade. She had left in September. She would have discovered it in October or November, and she had said nothing because... But that is running ahead. In these years, the years of the letters, Salvatore Greco did not know he was a father, because he was not, in fact, a father at all, though he did not know that either. And the not knowing of both those things was a bomb with a very long fuse, lit on a beach in September and set to go off in a hospital corridor 10 years later. For now he stood at the window above the Black River and watched the lights of the city that belonged to him, and he thought about a woman across town who was, at that exact moment, folding a letter she would never send, and neither of them knew the other was awake, and both of them left a light burning, and the river ran between them, dark and patient and cold. Marco finished his scotch and clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Get some sleep, Sal. The Fontana thing is handled. You worry too much." "That's the job," Sal said. "That's your job. My job's the fun part." Marco grinned again, that warm, quick grin, and Sal smiled back. Because he loved him, because he trusted him more than any living soul, because Marco was the one compartment on the whole ship he had never once thought to seal. He would remember that. Later, he would remember exactly how much he had trusted him, and the memory would be the worst wound of all, worse than any bullet, worse than his father's cigarette, worse than the sound of Teresa's car door closing on a September night. But that was a decade away, and the fuse was very long, and for now there was only the river and the lights, and two people in one city leaving the lights on for the same reason and calling it different names. From an unsent letter. Teresa to Sal, October 2017. Dear Sal, three letters in the cedar box now, and I've started to think of you the way you must think of the men you've lost. Not as a person anymore, but as an absence with a shape, a place at the table nobody sits at. My father died in June. I've been trying to write that sentence for 4 months. There, it's on paper now. Massive stroke, in the garden, among his tomatoes. He was 74 and stubborn, and he never once, in all the years, asked me why the beautiful Greco boy stopped coming to Sunday dinner. He must have known. He knew everything, my father, in the way of men who say little. Toward the end, in the hospital, I was there, of course, I am always the one in the hospital, he took my hand and he said, in Italian, so my mother wouldn't understand, "The one you don't talk about." "Was he good to you?" And I said, "Yes, Sal." God help me, I said yes. Because it was true. Because whatever else you were never once unkind to me. And my father closed his eyes and nodded like a man crossing something off a list. And 2 days later, he was gone. I wanted you at the funeral. Isn't that insane? I stood at St. Monica's in my black dress, with David's hand on the small of my back. Yes, David again. We drift back together, the way debris finds the same eddy. And I scanned the back of the church for a broad-shouldered man in a suit that costs too much. And you weren't there. And I was furious at you for not being there for a funeral you didn't know about and wouldn't have been welcome at. I am not well, is what I'm telling you. Grief has made a hole in me, and I keep filling it with you. Because you're the only thing large enough. There was a bad night in July. I'll tell the paper because I can't tell anyone alive. I drove to South Philly. I parked across from the social club on Passyunk. Everyone knows it's yours, the one with the green door. And I sat there for an hour, like a stalker, like a mad woman, watching men come and go, waiting for a glimpse of you. You never came out. Or you did, and I didn't recognize you. Or the man who did come out near midnight, the big one who stood on the step and lit a cigarette and looked up and down the street the way a soldier checks a perimeter. Maybe that was you. And I've changed so much, and you've changed so much, that I sat 40 feet from the only man I've ever loved and did not know his face. I drove home and I was sick in the kitchen sink and I swore I would never do it again. I won't do it again. But I wanted you to know I did it once. A woman is allowed to break one time in the year her father dies. T. From the Diary of Teresa Colombo, December 2017. David is seeing someone else, a radiologist, younger, uncomplicated. He told me over coffee, kindly, the way he does everything, and he said the thing I have been waiting 3 years for someone to have the courage to say to me. Teresa, you're a wonderful woman, but you're already married. You have been the whole time I've known you. I don't know to whom, and I don't think you'll ever tell me, and I've finally accepted that I can't compete with a ghost. I didn't argue. What was there to argue? He is right. I have been married to a man I left, faithful to a marriage that never happened, for 10 years, and I will probably die that way, an old woman in a house on Pine Street, with a cedar box full of letters and a folder full of clippings, and a photograph in a drawer of a boardwalk in the sun. I wished David well. I meant it. He deserves the radiologist, deserves an ordinary, happy life, with a woman who is actually present inside her own body. Afterward I came home and I did the math, which I do sometimes when I am punishing myself. I am 34. If I had stayed, if I had swallowed what I saw in that warehouse, if I had married Sal Greco and become a doctor to made men and their wives, patching bullet wounds in kitchens, asking no questions, I could have a child by now. 2. I imagine them sometimes. A boy with his stillness, a girl with my temper. They live in a house I invent, with a garden like my father's, and they are happy in the specific, impossible way of children who don't exist. I will not have children now. I've decided this cleanly, the way I decide clinical things. The window is closing, and I have no husband, and no prospects, and no desire to raise a child alone. And every day I hold other people's children, and give them back, and that will have to be enough. It is not enough, but it will have to be. I put the diary away, and I go to bed, and I leave the light on, because I always leave the light on. Because a decade ago, I heard something in a warehouse that lives in the dark, and I have never once slept in the dark since. and I have never once told a living soul why. What I did not write that December, because I did not yet know it, and would not know it for years, was that the child she was mourning already existed. She was 3 years old that winter. She had dark eyes and a temper and a stillness that came from somewhere, and she lived across the city in a house Teresa would never have thought to invent, raised by a man who told everyone she was his brother's orphan. And she was, at that moment, learning to say her own name, Sophia. But Teresa did not know that. Teresa mourned a child who was breathing across town, and left the light on, and slept badly, and folded another year into the cedar box. And the fuse burned on, silent and long, toward a corridor and a blood test, and the end of everything anyone thought they knew. Philadelphia, told from Sal's house in Chestnut Hill, across the years. He had not planned to keep her. That was the thing Salvatore Greco could never say aloud, not to anyone, because it made him sound like a monster, and he was not a monster, or he was trying every day not to be one. And the trying had begun with a phone call in the summer of 2014. The call had come from a woman named Angela DiMarco, who had been, briefly and without meaning much to either of them, a comfort in a bad year. The year Teresa left, in fact, the very autumn, when Sal had been a raw wound of a man, and Angela had been kind and warm and had asked nothing. It had lasted 2 months. It had ended without drama. And then, 10 months later, there had been a baby, and Angela had not told him, because Angela had her own complicated life and her own reasons. And it was only when Angela got sick, fast, the way it sometimes goes, a diagnosis in spring and a funeral by summer, that she had called him from a hospice bed and said the words that rearranged his entire life. "She's yours, Sal. Her name is Sophia. I never told you, because I didn't want her raised in your world. But I'm dying, and there's no one else, and I'm begging you, don't let her go into the system. Please, she's a good baby. She's so good." He had gone to the hospice. He had looked into a crib at a sleeping infant with a shock of dark hair, and something in the sealed submarine of his chest had flooded all the compartments at once, and he had known with the same total certainty that governed everything he did that he would burn the world down before he let anyone take this child from him. He had believed she was his. Why wouldn't he? The timing worked. Angela swore it. There was no reason on earth to doubt it, and every reason to want it, because a man who had lost the only woman he'd ever loved was being handed, against all deserving, a piece of a family he thought he'd never have. He named her the guardian of his own softness, Sophia. He hired the nurses, then fired them one by one, because none of them loved her enough, until he found Rosa, who did. He learned to warm a bottle. He, Salvatore Greco, who men crossed the street to avoid, sat up at 3 a.m. with a colicky infant on his shoulder, walking the length of the penthouse and back, singing under his breath the songs his mother had sung. And he wept sometimes, in the dark, out of a tenderness so violent it frightened him. And he told no one the whole truth. To the family, to the world, Sophia was his brother's child, an orphan, a tragedy, taken in. He built the lie carefully, because the lie was armor. A daughter is a vulnerability. He had said as much to Teresa a lifetime ago. A daughter is the softest place on a hard man, the one door your enemies will always try. So he hid her behind a story, moved her to the house in Chestnut Hill, with its walls and its cameras and its men who looked like gardeners and were not, and he raised her in a fortress disguised as a home. Marco adored her. That was the part that would, in time, become unbearable to remember. Marco, who was so good with her, who brought her impossible stuffed animals and taught her card tricks and let her paint his nails and paraded the results proudly at a sit-down with the Fontanas, daring anyone to say a word. "Uncle Marco," she called him. And Sal had thought nothing of it, had thought only that his brother's warmth was one more gift in a childhood he was trying to fill with gifts, to make up for the mother in the ground and the mother across town she would never know about. Because he did think about that, about Teresa, constantly in those years, in a new way, no longer only as the woman he'd lost, but as a mother-shaped absence in his daughter's life. He would watch Sophia sleep and think, she would love you. God, how she would love you. You would be so good at this, better than me. You were born to it. And then he would remember the warehouse, and his own hands, and the world he moved through, and he would seal that compartment too, because there was no version of the story where he brought a mob boss's hidden daughter to a paediatrician on Pine Street without destroying the paediatrician's whole, carefully rebuilt life. He kept her from Teresa to protect Teresa. That was the truth he told himself, and it was even mostly true. Sophia grew. She was, everyone agreed, an extraordinary child, grave and watchful like her father, then suddenly wildfire-tempered like no one he could name, he'd think, and let the thought go. Whip-smart. She read early. She underlined passages in books she was too young for, and defended her underlining with a stubbornness that made his chest ache without his understanding why. "Where does she get it?" Rosa would laugh when Sophia planted her small feet and refused to eat her vegetables with the immovable dignity of a diplomat. Her mother, Sal would say, meaning Angela, and something in him would flinch at the word, though he did not know why, would not know why for years, until a blood test in a hospital told him a truth so cruel that he would go out to his car and sit with his hands very still on the wheel, the way he had outside the cardiologist's house a decade before, and understand for the first time in his life what it felt like to want to kill a dead woman and a living brother in the same breath. But that was ahead. In these years there was only Sophia growing, and the lie that kept her safe, and a man learning that the only thing more terrifying than loving a woman you can't have is loving a child you can lose. He learned that fully in her 7th year, when the bruises started, and the fevers, and the pallor no vitamin could fix, and the first paediatrician frowned and ordered blood work, and called him back to the office with the particular gentleness Sal recognized instantly because he had used it himself on men he was about to hurt. That was the day the fortress fell. That was the day Salvatore Greco, who had spent his whole life closing off flooding compartments, discovered there was a flood no bulkhead could hold. From an unsent letter, Teresa to Sal, October 2019. Dear Sal, 5. Half a decade of Octobers. Half a decade of this wine going down my throat while I write to a man who will never read a word. Something strange happened this year, and I need to set it down because it has haunted me for months. A child came into my practice in the spring, a girl, 5 years old, brought in by a nanny, a warm, heavy-set woman named Rosa, who did not look like any nanny I'd ever met, who scanned my waiting room the way a bodyguard scans a room, and by a man who waited in the car. I never saw the man. Rosa said he was the girl's guardian and would not come in. There was money about them, the quiet, dangerous kind of money, the kind I grew up smelling in South Philly, and I thought nothing of it, or I told myself I thought nothing of it. The child. Sal, the child. She had your stillness. I am aware how I sound. I hold 200 children a year. I am not a woman who sees ghosts in every dark-eyed toddler. But this one sat on my table with her hands folded and her chin level, and she watched me with a gravity that stopped my heart. And when I asked her a question, she considered it, actually considered it, this 5-year-old, weighing her answer before she spoke. And I had to turn away and pretend to wash my hands because my eyes had filled and I could not have said why. Her name was Sophia. Ear infection, nothing serious, amoxicillin and rest. I have seen 1,000 ear infections. I have never once had to lock myself in the supply closet afterward, and I did that day for 11 minutes. The same 11, always 11, and I sobbed as though something had been taken from me, and I could not have told you what. I never saw her again. The follow-up was cancelled. Rosa called and said the family had changed paediatricians, and I stood in my office, holding the phone, and felt bereft, actually bereft, over a child I'd met once. And I decided I was losing my mind, that childlessness had rotted something in me, that I was inventing significance the way lonely people do. But I've thought about her all year. Sophia. I wonder whose she is. I wonder about the man in the car. I wonder, and here is where you'll know I've gone truly mad, I wonder if the world is small enough, cruel enough, that a girl with your stillness could be sitting on my examination table and me not know. She can't be yours. You don't have children. Men like you don't. I've told myself that for years, and I'm telling myself now. But I wrote down her name, Sophia. I don't know why. I wrote it in the front of my appointment book, where I'll see it every day, and I can't make myself cross it out. T. She had been closer to the truth that October than she would be again for 6 more years. She had held her own daughter on an examination table and felt the tidal pull of it in her blood and called it madness. She had written the child's name in the front of her appointment book, and the man in the car, she never knew, had sat with his hands very still on the wheel, having chosen that paediatrician on purpose, and then having lost his nerve, having realized halfway through the appointment that he could not do it, could not sit in that waiting room and watch Teresa Colombo walk out to greet a patient and see him there, could not detonate her life with his presence, and had sent Rosa in alone and cancelled the follow-up, and driven away with his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He had told himself it was a mistake choosing her practice, a weakness. He had wanted, just once, to put his daughter in the same room as the woman who should have been her mother. Some superstitious animal part of him needing the two of them under one roof for the length of a single appointment. And then he had panicked at what he'd risked and pulled back into the dark. They had been 40 feet apart, mother and daughter, and neither had known, and the fuse had burned a little shorter. From the diary of Teresa Colombo, February 2020. I turned 37 this month, and I spent my birthday alone by choice, which is different from spending it alone by circumstance, I keep telling myself, though I'm no longer certain there's a difference that matters. I've made partner in name at the practice. It's just Angeli and me now, and we've hired 2 associates, and the waiting room is full every day. And I am, by every external measure, a success. Dr. Columbo, beloved, trusted. There are children in this city alive today because of decisions I made at 2 in the morning, and I hold that knowledge like a coal, warming, real. And yet, there is a girl named Sophia I met once, whose face I cannot lose. I have started, God forgive me, to watch for a particular black car. I have started to look twice at broad-shouldered men on the street. The discipline of a decade, the training I did on myself, the not saying, the not looking, has cracked. And I don't know why now, why this year, except that the child broke something open, some door I'd sealed, and behind it was all the water I'd been storing, and it's coming out. I think I need to see him. This is the thought I've been circling for weeks, and finally I'm writing it down. Not to reunite, God no. Only to close it. To stand in front of Salvatore Greco one time as the woman I am now, not the girl who ran, and to see him plainly, older, colder, a stranger, and to feel the spell break the way spells break when you finally look at the thing in daylight. I think if I saw him, I could stop. I think the fantasy survives only because it's never tested against the real. I won't do it, of course. I'm too much a coward, or too much a survivor, which in my case have always been the same thing. But I wrote it down, that I want to see him. After 10 years. I left the light on, and I lay awake. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine the beach house, the last night, the open windows and the sound of the ocean, and his voice against my hair. And I did not turn on the harsher lamp to chase it away. I let myself remember, just once, as a birthday gift to the girl I used to be. Philadelphia, Spring 2025, from Sal's World. The word was leukemia, and it came out of the doctor's mouth in a beige office with a box of tissues placed strategically within reach, and Salvatore Greco heard it the way he'd heard incoming fire once in his 20s. A flat concussion that arrived before the sound, the meaning slamming into him a full second ahead of the words. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the oncologist said. Dr. Weiss, a careful man, grey, chosen because he was the best in the city and because he asked no questions about how a man like Sal came to be a single father, or where the child's mother was, or why the intake forms were filled out in a hand that pressed so hard it tore the paper. It's the most common childhood cancer, Mr. Greco. I want to start there. And in children, it's often very treatable. Often, Sal repeated. His voice came out level. It always came out level. It was the last thing to go. Not always. Not always. But the numbers are good. I need you to hold on to that. Sophia was 10 years old. She was in the waiting room with Rosa, colouring, believing she was there for the tiredness and the bruises, believing the grown-ups would fix it, because that is what she believed about her father, that there was nothing on earth he could not fix, that the world rearranged itself around his will. And she was not wrong. She had simply never encountered the one thing that would not. They started treatment. Chemotherapy, the induction phase, the long, brutal months of it. Sal moved his entire operation to accommodate it. He was Salvatore Greco. He could bend a city. He could not, it turned out, bend a single cell gone wrong in his daughter's marrow. He learned the vocabulary the way he'd once learned the vocabulary of his trade. Blast count, remission, minimal residual disease, relapse. And he sat in the small chair beside the big hospital bed while a machine dripped poison into his child to kill the thing that was killing her. And he held her hand, and he told her stories. And at night he went home and stood at the window above the Black River and did not drink, because he needed to be sharp, because being sharp was the only thing he had left to offer. She went into remission that summer. He allowed himself to breathe. She relapsed in the winter. That was the word that changed the war. Relapse. Dr. Weiss said it with his careful, grey gentleness, and Sal understood, from the man's face, before the man said the rest, that the easy road was closed now, that they had used the good tools, and the good tools had failed, and that what remained was the hard tool, the last tool, the one with the ugly numbers. A bone marrow transplant, Dr. Weiss said, is her best chance now. Realistically, her only durable chance. Which means we need to find a donor. And the best donors, by a wide margin, are relatives. Siblings first, then parents. Family. Family. Sal had a great deal of family. He had a whole empire of family, some by blood and more by oath. He had a brother he loved above all men, and he had himself. "Test me," Sal said. "Test me first." "Of course. We'll do an HLA typing. It's a simple blood draw, and any biological relatives you can bring in. The mother's side," Dr. Weiss consulted the chart delicately. "I understand the mother is deceased, but if there's anyone on her side, aunts, uncles, cousins, they could match. And on your side. The more we test, the better her odds." Sal thought of Angela DeMarco in the ground. No siblings. Parents dead. A dead end, that side. His own side, then. Himself. Marco. A network of Greco cousins who would open a vein for the boss's daughter without asking why. "I'll bring my brother," Sal said, "and cousins, as many as you need." "Good," said Dr. Weiss. "That's good, Mr. Greco. Family is the best hope we have." Sal drove home that night and stood at the window, and for the first time in a decade he thought of Teresa Colombo not as a wound, but as a resource, and hated himself for it, and could not stop, because here was the thing he had been circling for weeks without letting himself land on it. Teresa was a pediatrician. Not just a pediatrician, one of the best in the city, and more than that, a specialist in exactly the small, failing bodies he now spent his life beside. He had followed her career from a distance for 10 years, the way another man might follow a sports team. He knew she'd published. He knew she consulted at CHOP. He knew that if there was one doctor in Philadelphia he would trust with his daughter's life, one doctor whose competence he did not have to take on faith, one doctor he knew, in the marrow of his own bones, would fight for a child as though the child were her own. It was her. He had kept Sophia from Teresa for 10 years to protect Teresa. Now Sophia was dying, and the woman who might save her was a woman he'd sworn never to drag into his dark. And Sal stood at the window and felt the two halves of his life, the woman and the child, the two people he loved most, kept apart by a decade of careful walls, begin, at last, to move toward collision. He did not know the worst of it yet. He did not know that the collision would not be the one he feared. He thought the danger was his world touching hers. He did not yet know that the real bomb was buried deeper, in Sophia's blood itself, in the double helix that would soon tell a truth about his brother, that would make the Mafia and the leukemia both look, briefly, like the lesser catastrophes. He only knew that his daughter was dying, and that there was one door left he had spent 10 years refusing to open. He opened his phone. He found, in a contacts list where her name had lived unused for a decade, under a code only he understood, a number he had never once called. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put the phone down, because he was still, even now, trying to protect her, and he would try for 3 more months, until the last other door closed. Until Dr. Weiss said the words, "We're running out of time," and only then, at the absolute end of his options, would Salvatore Greco finally do the thing he had sworn he never would. He would go to Pine Street. He would knock on her door, and he would beg. From the diary of Teresa Colombo and the night that ended the letters, spring 2025. It was a Tuesday. I want that on the record because everything before it and everything after it divides along that ordinary Tuesday like a country split by a river. I had come home late, a long day, 2 admissions, a difficult conversation with parents who did not want to hear what I had to tell them, and I'd poured a glass of wine, though it wasn't October, though I had a private rule about the wine and October, and I'd broken it because I was tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. The knock came at 9:40. Nobody knocks on Pine Street at 9:40. My neighbours text, deliveries buzz. A knock, real knuckles on real wood, is a thing out of another era, and I stood in my kitchen with the glass in my hand and my heart doing something complicated, because some animal part of me knew before my mind allowed it. I opened the door with the chain on, and there he was. I want to describe him accurately, because I have imagined this moment 10,000 times, and reality is owed the courtesy of precision. He was older. Of course he was older, so am I. But the years had done to him what I'd read in the paper, burned the boy away and left the architecture. Grey at the temples now, lines around the eyes, a suit, dark, expensive, rain-flecked because it was raining. It is always raining in the parts of my life that matter. And his face. His face, when the door opened and he saw me, did something I had never once seen it do in 3 years of loving him. It broke. For half a second, before he mastered it, Salvatore Greco's face broke open like a boy's, and I understood in that instant that whatever had brought him to my door after 10 years was not desire and not nostalgia and not power. It was terror. The man I'd never seen afraid was afraid. "Teresa," he said. Just my name. His voice was lower than I remembered, roughened, but the way he said my name was exactly the same, exactly, and 10 years fell away, and I had to grip the doorframe. "Sal?" I meant it to come out cold. It came out cracked. "I need your help." He said it fast, before I could close the door, before either of us could retreat into the roles we'd rehearsed apart for a decade. "I wouldn't be here. I swore I'd never— Teresa, I have kept away from you for 10 years. I have kept my word. You have to know that whatever this looks like—" He stopped. He was not a man who ran out of words. He ran out of words. "It's my daughter," he said. She's dying, and you're the only person alive I trust to save her." I stood there with the chain on the door between us, and the whole architecture of my carefully rebuilt life came down without a sound. His daughter. The words hit me in a strange order. First the professional, dying, what condition, what have they tried? Then the personal, arriving a half-beat later, like the sound after the concussion. His daughter. He has a daughter. Some woman gave him a child. He has a child, and I have a cedar box. And then, underneath both, something else, something I did not understand for weeks, a third thing that moved in me like a fish under ice. A girl named Sophia I'd met once, 5 years old, who had your stillness. Sophia. I'd written her name in my appointment book. "How old?" I heard myself say. 10. 10. The arithmetic did itself unbidden, the way arithmetic does for a woman who counts things. 10 years old. Conceived then around... My mind shied away. I did not do the rest of the math. Not that night. My mind, which does math on everything, refused this one sum, and I understand now that it refused it out of mercy, because I was not ready, because some sums you can only do once, and I wasn't ready to do this one and have it be true. "What's her name?" I said instead. And he said, "Sophia." I took the chain off the door. I don't remember deciding to. My hand did it. 10 years of discipline, 10 years of not looking and not saying, and a single word, her name, the name I'd written in my appointment book and could not cross out, undid all of it, and I opened the door of my house to Salvatore Greco at 9:40 on an ordinary Tuesday. And the rain came in around him, and he stood on my threshold, not touching me, careful, so careful, his hands at his sides, like a man surrendering. "Tell me everything," I said, "from the beginning. The diagnosis, the treatment, all of it. Talk to me like I'm her doctor, not like I'm..." I couldn't finish that sentence either. "Not like I'm the woman you ruined. Not like I'm the ghost you married. Talk to me like a doctor." So he came in. Salvatore Greco stood in my kitchen, dripping, and told me about acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and induction, and remission, and relapse, and I listened with the front of my mind, while the back of my mind screamed, and I was already, God help me, already reaching for a notepad, already a doctor, already fighting for a child I hadn't met. A child who was mine, though I did not yet know it, though the knowing was 3 weeks and 1 blood test away, though everything he'd built his 10 years of silence to prevent was about to happen anyway, worse than he'd feared, in a way neither of us could have invented in our darkest imaginings. "Bring me everything," I said when he finished. "Every scan, every lab. I want to see it all." And Sal, he looked at me, and his broken boy face was under control now, but his eyes weren't. His eyes were begging, and I said the thing I would spend the rest of my life unable to take back. "I'll save her, whatever it takes. I promise you, I'll save her." I did not know I was promising to save my own daughter. I did not know that the promise I made in my kitchen was a promise to my own child. I only knew that a man I'd loved for half my life was standing in my house with fear in his eyes, and that somewhere across the city a 10-year-old girl named Sophia was fighting for her life, and that I would rather have died than fail her. He left near midnight. He did not touch me once. At the door he paused, And he looked at me the way a starving man looks through glass, and he said, "Thank you." And then, lower, "You look exactly the same." Which was a lie, a kind one, and I let him have it. When he was gone, I sat at my grandmother's desk, and I did not write a letter. For the first time in 11 Octobers, though it wasn't October, I had nothing to write to him, because he was no longer a ghost. He was a man who had stood in my kitchen, and you cannot write unsent letters to a man who leaves footprints of rain on your floor. Instead, I opened the cedar box, and I looked at the 10 folded letters stacked on the red velvet, 10 years of longing addressed to a silence, and I understood that the silence was over, and that I was afraid, and that underneath the fear was something I had no right to feel, and felt anyway, roaring up through the floor of me like water through a broken hull. Joy. God forgive me. My old love had come back through my door begging me to save a dying child, and some ruined part of me was glad, was singing, was more alive than it had been in a decade. I left the light on. I always leave the light on. But that night, for the first time, I understood that I'd been leaving it on not for the thing in the dark I was afraid of, but for the man I was afraid would come, and that he'd finally come, and the light had done its work, and I could not decide whether to be grateful or terrified. So I was both, all night. Until the grey came up over Pine Street, and it was time to go and be a doctor again. Philadelphia, from Teresa's diary. 3 days later, I met her on a Friday. Sal had arranged everything with the terrifying efficiency of a man who arranges things. A private wing, essentially, at the Children's Hospital where he apparently funds an entire floor under a foundation name nobody questions. Money is a language, and he speaks it fluently, and I found, walking those corridors, that I did not want to know the grammar of how he'd paid for this. Dr. Weiss met me first, a good man, careful, the best in the city, and generous enough not to bristle when a paediatrician from Pine Street was suddenly given co-authority over his patient by a father whose requests are not requests. We reviewed the file together. I read it twice. The disease, the relapse, the plan, a matched transplant, if a donor could be found, and the search underway among the father's relatives, and the clock, always the clock, running. Then I went in to meet her. I had prepared myself. I am a professional. I have walked into 1,000 rooms, holding 1,000 sick children, and I know how to keep my face right, how to be warm without being frightening, how to let a child feel that the grave adult before her is not grave because of anything the child has done wrong. I was not prepared. She was sitting up in the bed with a book, too old for her, some fat fantasy novel, and her head was wrapped in a bright scarf because the chemo had taken her hair, and she looked up when I came in with a gravity that stopped me in the doorway, exactly as it had stopped me 5 years before in my own exam room. And I knew her. Sophia, the girl with the stillness. Older now. Sicker now, but the same child, weighing me with the same considering dark eyes before deciding whether I was worth speaking to. "You're the new doctor," she said, not a question. "The one Papa keeps talking about." "I'm Dr. Columbo," I said. "Teresa, you can call me either." "Are you good?" she asked. "At being a doctor? Because Papa says you're the best, but Papa says a lot of things when he's scared and thinks I can't tell he's scared." I laughed, actually laughed, which is not what one usually does in these rooms, and I sat down in the chair beside her bed, and I said, "I'm very good. And you're right that your papa is scared. Smart people usually can tell. She studied me a moment longer. Then she closed her book on her finger to hold the place, which told me the conversation had earned her full attention, and she said, "Okay, I'll let you be my doctor. I'll let you." The exact cadence of a girl who had never once in her life doubted that she was the one who granted permission. His daughter. Utterly, unmistakably his daughter, and yet when she got angry, 20 minutes later, when a nurse came to take blood and Sophia's face went from grave to thunderous in half a second, planting her small feet in the mutinous dignity of someone who has decided enough is enough. That temper, that wildfire, that was not his. His anger is arctic. It drops the temperature of a room. Hers was hot, immediate, a flash flood, and I watched it, and something cold walked up my spine, because I know that temper. I have owned that temper my whole life. My father used to call me piccola tempesta, little storm, and I sat in that hospital chair and watched my own rage on a stranger's child's face. And I told myself, firmly, that I was tired, that I was projecting, that a lonely, childless woman sees her longing everywhere. I told myself that for 3 weeks. Sal came in while I was there. He stopped in the doorway when he saw us together, me in the chair, Sophia mid-tirade at the poor nurse, and his face did the broken thing again, just for a second. And I understood he had never once seen us in the same room. That this tableau meant something to him I didn't yet grasp. And he covered it and came in. And Sophia's fury evaporated the instant she saw him, transmuted into pure relief. "Papa, tell them I don't need more blood taken. I've given enough blood to fill a bathtub." "You've given about a teaspoon," Sal said mildly, and crossed to her and pressed his mouth to the crown of her scarfed head with a tenderness that undid me. This man, this feared man, gentling his child. And I had to look at the window. "Dr. Colombo says she'll let me be difficult," Sophia announced. "I said no such thing," I said. "You implied it." Sal looked at me over his daughter's head, and there was a question in his eyes I couldn't read, and a gratitude I could. And under it both, something that had been there in a library 20 years ago, and had, apparently, never fully died in either of us. And I stood up too fast and said I had rounds, which was a lie, and I left the room and stood in the corridor and breathed. 11 minutes, I thought. I want to go somewhere and cry for 11 minutes. I didn't. I went home. I opened my appointment book to the front page where 5 years ago I'd written her name and could not cross it out. Sophia. And I sat looking at my own handwriting for a long time. Then I got out a piece of paper. Not a letter to Sal. That ritual was dead. Something else. I made a chart, the way I do when a case frightens me and I need to turn feeling into fact. Column 1. Things I could explain. The stillness, inherited from Sal, obviously. The intelligence, both her parents, presumably. The dark eyes, Sal. Column 2. Things I couldn't. The temper. The specific temper. My temper. Column 3, which I stared at for an hour before I could bring myself to write it, and then wrote in letters so small I could barely read them, as though writing it small might make it small. The math. 10 years old. Conceived at the latest 11 years ago. I did the sum I had refused to do in my kitchen. The last night. The beach house. September 11 years ago. And then I told myself the thing every doctor tells herself when a diagnosis is too terrible to be true. Correlation is not causation. Timing is not proof. You are a grieving, childless woman, and you are seeing what you need to see. I closed the notebook. I left the light on, but I did not sleep, and I did not stop doing the math. And somewhere across the city, a father who thought he already knew the worst was arranging a blood test that would tell all three of us a truth none of us had the strength to be ready for. Philadelphia from Teresa's diary and the nights at the hospital, spring 2025. We fell into a rhythm, the three of us, in the way that hospitals impose rhythm, the tyranny of the schedule, the labs at dawn, the doctor's rounds, the long dead middle of the afternoon when a sick child sleeps and the adults who love her sit in the dim room and have nowhere to look but at each other. That was where it happened, not in a rush, not in a scene, in the long afternoons while Sophia slept, when there was nothing to do but be in a room with Salvatore Greco after a decade of writing him letters I never sent. We talked. God, we talked. At first only about her, the labs, the counts, the plan, the donor search that was coming up empty, cousin after cousin tested, and none of them close enough, and Marco, his brother whom he kept saying he'd bring in and kept not bringing in for reasons I didn't understand yet. Some scheduling thing, some evasion I noticed and filed away. But medicine can only fill so many hours, and eventually we talked about the rest. "You never married," he said one afternoon. Not a question. He knew. Of course he knew. A man like him would know everything about me. And I found I wasn't even angry. Only tired. "You watched me," I said. "Yes." "For 10 years?" "Yes." He didn't apologize. That was the thing about him I'd forgotten and now remembered like a taste. He did not perform contrition, did not soften his edges to make himself palatable. "I told you I wouldn't chase you. I kept my word. Watching from a distance isn't chasing." A pause. "That's the lie I told myself anyway." "The cardiologist," I said. "David, did you—" "I sat outside his house once," Sal said, and his voice was very even, and that evenness told me everything. "In 2016. I thought about it. I want to be honest with you, Teresa, because I think I've run out of the luxury of anything else. I thought about it, and I didn't. And the not doing it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than anything. Because I am not—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I am not a good man. I've never pretended to be. But I love you. And loving you is the one place I've ever managed to be better than my nature. And I let him live. And I let you go. And I've spent 10 years being proud of two things: that I never hurt him, and that I never came to your door. And now I've come to your door." The room was very quiet. Sophia's monitor beeped its patient rhythm. Outside, the city went about its business, indifferent. "You came for her," I said, "not for me." "I came for her," he agreed, and then, because he had apparently decided that honesty was the only currency left, "But I would be lying if I said walking back into your life didn't feel like—" He searched for it, this articulate, dangerous man, searching. Like coming up for air after 10 years underwater. I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe. I'd forgotten on purpose. It was easier. I should have said something professional, something with a wall in it. I have spent my whole life building walls, quick and clean, brick after brick. I opened my mouth to lay a brick. What came out was, "I wrote you letters. Every year. I never sent them." His stillness changed quality. It went from the stillness of a predator to the stillness of a man who has been struck. For 10 years, I said, and now that the wall had a hole in it, the water came through, the way it always does. Every October, on the anniversary, I have a box, there are 10 of them. I told you everything, Sal, my father dying, David, the practice, every stupid, lonely thing. I told a man who would never read it because it was the only way I could survive not telling you. You were the only person I've ever been able to be honest with, and you weren't even there. He stood up. He crossed the small room. He did not touch me. He was so careful never to touch me all those weeks, as though he knew that the first touch would be the end of both our restraint. But he stood close, closer than we'd been in a decade, and I could smell him, the same, God, the same, cedar and something darker underneath, and I had to close my eyes. "Say one of them to me," he said very low. "One line, from one letter. Teresa, I need to know what you said to me all those years." And I, who had guarded those letters like organs, who had never spoken a word of them aloud, opened my eyes and looked at Salvatore Greco and said the truest line I'd ever written. "You ruined me for Restful. You made Restful feel like drowning slowly instead of quickly." Something broke in his face for the 3rd time since he'd come back into my life, and this time he didn't master it. And I watched a man the whole city feared stand in a hospital room and let his eyes fill. And he said, "I'm sorry." And it was the first time in 20 years I had ever heard him apologize for anything. And I understood he wasn't apologizing for coming back. He was apologizing for leaving. "We can't," I said. My voice shook. "Sal, whatever this is, we have a sick child and a donor search, and I am her doctor, and there are 100 reasons." "I know," he said. "I mean it." "I know," he said again. And he stepped back, deliberately, putting the distance back between us, an act of will I could see cost him. And he sat down again in his chair on the other side of his sleeping daughter. And we stayed like that, on opposite sides of the bed, the child between us, the way we would be for the rest of the story, in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The child always between us, the child who was the reason and the obstacle, and though I still wouldn't let myself finish the math, the answer. Sophia stirred, opened her eyes, looked from her father to me and back, with the uncanny perception of a sick child who has learnt to read every adult in every room. "You two are being weird," she announced. "We're being professional," I said. "You're being weird," she said, with total confidence, and closed her eyes again. And Sal and I looked at each other over her small body and did not laugh. Because it wasn't funny. Because she was ours. His, I corrected, ferociously. His. And time was running out, and I still hadn't let myself do the math out loud. Philadelphia, from both sides, spring 2025. Sal kept not bringing Marco to be tested, and I finally asked him why. We were in the family lounge, the fake cosy one with the burgundy chairs, and I'd cornered him with a clipboard and my doctor's voice, because the donor search was failing, and every relative mattered, and the one relative he kept deferring was the closest one, a full sibling, potentially the best match of all. "Your brother," I said. "Marco. He's the most likely match after you. Why isn't he tested? You keep saying you'll bring him." Sal's face did a thing I'd started to be able to read, a tightening, a closing. "He travels for the business. He's been out of state." Then fly him back. Sal, this is your daughter's life.
A brother is... I stopped, because his face had gone strange, and I realized, with the diagnostician's instinct that has never once failed me, that I was standing near something. "He'll come," Sal said. "I'll get him here, this week." "What aren't you telling me?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Marco and I had a falling out years ago. It's complicated. Family things. I don't like to owe him." It was a lie. Not a total lie. I'd learn later there was a real coldness there, a thing between the brothers I couldn't see the shape of. But the reason he gave wasn't the real reason, and I knew it. And I let it go because I had a dying child to think about, and not enough hours to excavate a mob family's grudges. But I want to record what I now understand, writing this later, knowing what I know. That Sal's reluctance was the first tremor of the earthquake. That some buried instinct in him, some animal knowing that lives below thought, did not want his brother's blood in a lab next to his daughter's. That he could not have told you why. That he loved Marco, trusted Marco above all men, and yet some sealed compartment of him, the one he'd never known was there, resisted. And he overrode it, because his daughter was dying, and you test the family. You always test the family. Family is the best hope. He brought Marco in that Thursday. I met him in the corridor. Marco Greco was, I'll be honest, dazzling in a way his brother wasn't. Where Sal was granite, Marco was quicksilver, all warmth and quick smiles and an easy hand on your arm that made you feel chosen. Beautiful, the way old paintings are beautiful. He kissed my hand, actually kissed it, and called me the famous Dr. Columbo my brother won't shut up about. And I disliked him instantly, and couldn't have told you why, some frequency under the charm that set my teeth on edge. He adored Sophia. That was real, unmistakable, no performance in it. His whole face changed when he saw her, went soft and stricken, and Sophia lit up. "Uncle Marco!" And he sat on her bed and did card tricks with hands that shook slightly, and I watched him love that child, and I revised my opinion a little, because a man who loves a child that openly can't be all frequency under the charm. "Whatever she needs," Marco said to me in the hall afterward, and his eyes were wet, the same quick wet as his brother's, the family eyes. "You understand me, Doctor? Whatever she needs. I'll give her every drop of blood in my body. She's..." His voice caught. "She's the best thing this family ever made. Test me. Take whatever you want." "We'll do the HLA typing today," I said. "It's just a blood draw. If you're a match, we'll talk about the harvest." "Do it now," he said. "Right now." So we did. The blood went to the lab. HLA typing takes days, the proteins on the surface of the cells, the markers that determine whether a graft will take or a body will reject its own salvation. Days of waiting. I threw myself into Sophia's care to fill them. Sal and I orbited each other over her bed. Marco came every day, always with a gift, always with that shaking-handed devotion that had made me revise my opinion of him. And then the results came back. Dr. Weiss called me into his office first, because he is a careful man, and because he had seen something in the numbers that made him want a colleague in the room before he understood it. And he laid the report on the desk between us and said, "This is strange." "Strange how?" "Marco Greco is a match, a very good match, better than a sibling of the father should statistically be, given that the father himself," he pulled Sal's typing,
Given that the father is only a partial match, actually, he frowned, grey and careful, tracing the rows with a pen. The father is a poorer match than I'd expect for a biological parent. He shares, Teresa, look at this. He shares fewer markers with Sophia than a father should. A biological father passes half his HLA haplotype to his child. Guaranteed. It's not probabilistic, it's Mendelian. And these numbers, I looked at the numbers. I am a doctor. I have read 10,000 lab reports. I read this one, and the room went very far away and came back. And I heard my own voice from very far off ask the question I already knew the answer to. Are you saying Salvatore Greco is not Sophia's biological father? Dr. Weiss took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He is a careful man, and he did not want to say it, and he said it anyway, because we are doctors, and the truth is our only sacrament. I'm saying the haplotypes are incompatible with paternity. There's no version of this where that man is her father. He put his glasses back on.
But the uncle, Marco, his match is too good for an uncle. His match is... He stopped. His match, I said, is the match of a father. The two of us sat in that office in silence, and then, because grief has a terrible way of doing math when you least want it to, my own private sum finished itself at last, the one I'd refused to complete in my kitchen and refused again in my notebook. If Sal wasn't her father, if the man I'd been circling this truth around for weeks wasn't the father at all, then whose stillness did she have? Whose dark eyes? Not Sal's. And her temper, her wildfire temper, my temper, piccola tempesta. The math I'd refused finished itself, and I sat in Dr.
Weiss's office, and I understood that the ground I'd been standing on for weeks had never been ground at all, and that under it was something so much worse and so much more than I had let myself imagine. And I put my hand over my mouth, and Dr. Weiss said, "Teresa, are you all right?" I was not all right. I would not be all right for a long time. Because there was a second sum now, running alongside the first, and it was worse, and it was mine. From the diary of Teresa Colombo, written the same night, barely legible in places, I have started this entry 4 times. My hand won't hold the pen. I am writing this at 3 a.m., with every light in the house burning, and I don't think I will sleep tonight, or maybe ever again, the same way. Let me be a doctor. Let me be clinical. It's the only way I can get it onto the page. Fact 1. Salvatore Greco is not Sophia's biological father. The HLA typing is definitive. He has believed for 10 years that she is his. She is not. Fact 2. Marco Greco's HLA match is consistent not with an uncle, but with a father. The most parsimonious explanation, Occam's razor, the first tool they give you, is that Marco is Sophia's biological father, that Sal's brother, the man he trusts most in the world, fathered the child Sal has raised as his own. I cannot yet imagine how. Sal told me the mother was a woman named Angela, dead of cancer years ago. Did she deceive both brothers? Did Marco know? Did Marco know for 10 years, sitting at that child's bedside doing card tricks, calling her his niece, knowing? I don't know. I don't know the shape of the betrayal yet, only that it is enormous, and that when Sal learns it, I am afraid. Not for myself. I'm afraid of what a man like Salvatore Greco does with a wound like this. I have spent weeks watching him love his daughter, and love still, God help us both, me. And I have let myself forget the man in the warehouse, the man the city fears, the man whose rivals simply stop existing. That man is going to learn that his brother betrayed him in the most intimate way one man can betray another. And I do not know what that man will do. And I am the one who has to tell him. That's fact 3. I have to tell him. But here is fact 4. Here is the sum I refused to do in my kitchen, and refused in my notebook, and can refuse no longer, because a lab report tore the floor out, and I am in free fall, and I have to write it down, or I will die of it. Sal is not her father, so her stillness is not his stillness. Her dark eyes are not his dark eyes. Whose then? Marco's, presumably, if Marco is the father. The Greco eyes, the Greco's stillness. It runs in that family. I've seen it in both brothers. That accounts for it. That's the answer. That should be the answer. But her temper. Sal is Arctic. Marco is quicksilver, warm, no thunder in him. Neither brother has that wildfire, that flash flood rage, that piccola tempesta. I have watched Sophia go from grave to incandescent in half a second 12 times, and I have felt every single time the cold walk of recognition up my spine, because I know that temper in the deepest way a person can know anything. I have lived inside it my whole life. My father named it. My mother despairs of it. It is mine. And the math. 10 years old. Sophia is 10. She turned 10 in... I checked the chart. I have access to the chart. God forgive me, I checked. She turned 10 in June. Conceived, therefore, the previous September. 11 years ago this coming autumn. The last night. The beach house. The open windows and the Atlantic and his voice against my hair. September. 11 years ago. I left Sal that September. I discovered that October. I have never written this down. Not in 10 years of letters, not in this diary, not anywhere. I have carried it alone in the deepest sealed compartment of my own submarine, and I am going to write it now because the ship is going down anyway. I was pregnant when I left him. I discovered it 3 weeks after the beach house, alone, in the bathroom of my residency apartment. And I sat on the cold tile and I thought about the warehouse and what I'd seen and what my child would be born into. And I made a decision that I have spent 11 years not thinking about. I did not keep it. Or, I have to be honest even now, especially now, I told myself I did not keep it. I made the appointment, I went to the clinic, and I could not do it. I sat in the waiting room, and I could not do it, and I left, and I went home, and 3 days later I began to bleed. And it was over anyway, the decision taken out of my hands by my own body, a miscarriage at 9 weeks, and I have never known, I have never let myself wonder whether it was truly a miscarriage or whether my failure to grieve it properly was a way of hiding from myself that I had, in some deep place, willed it. I lost the baby. That is the fact. 11 years ago, I lost Sal's baby, and I never told him, and I have never spoken of it, and it is the reason for the letters and the light I leave on, and the 11 minutes I cry in supply closets, always 11, the number of weeks I might have carried her. And I have built my entire life on top of that grief, like a house on a grave.
So it cannot be. The sum cannot be what the sum is saying. My child is dead, lost 11 years ago. There is no living daughter of mine and Sal's. It is impossible. And yet a girl with my exact temper is dying across the city, and the man who fathered her has the Greco eyes and Sal's brother's blood, and the woman who supposedly bore her is conveniently dead, and the timing is the exact timing. And I am a doctor, and I do not believe in coincidences of this magnitude. And there is a test. There is always a test. That is the terrible mercy and cruelty of my profession. There is a test that would tell me. A maternity test. My blood against Sophia's. I could do it. I have access. I could do it tomorrow and tell no one and know. And if it's positive, if the daughter I have mourned for 11 years is the child dying in that bed, then Angela DiMarco did not bear her at all. Then the whole story Sal was told is a lie inside a lie. Then someone took my lost child. No, I can't. I can't follow it there tonight. The pen won't hold. I only know I have to run the test, and I have to tell Sal his brother betrayed him. And I have to do both these things, carrying a secret of my own, 11 years deep. And I do not know which truth will destroy us first. And I have left every light in the house on, and it is not enough. It has never been enough, and it is almost dawn. Philadelphia, The Unravelling, Spring 2025. I did not sleep. At 6 I called the lab, and I called in every favour I had, and I arranged, quietly, off the books, a maternity comparison, my blood against Sophia's. And I told myself it was clinical diligence, ruling out a wild hypothesis, and I knew it was not. Then I went to find Sal, because the first truth, the one about Marco, could not wait. And because I am a coward who would rather deliver someone else's catastrophe than my own. He knew the moment he saw my face. He is a man who reads faces for a living, in the sense that reading faces has kept him alive, and he stood up from the burgundy chair in the family lounge, and he said, "The results. There's a match." "There's a match," I said. "Sal, sit down." "I don't sit down for good news, and I don't sit down for bad. Tell me." So I told him. In the clinical voice, the only voice that would hold, I told him that Marco was an excellent match for Sophia, good enough to be a donor, that this was the good news, that his daughter could be saved. And then, because he is not a stupid man, and he was already watching my face, I watched him arrive at the rest before I said it. "You said, good enough to be a donor," he said slowly. "You said it like there's a but. Marco's a match. Teresa, that's what we prayed for. Why do you look like someone died?" "Because the match is too good," I said, "for an uncle." The room went silent. I have never in my life watched a man's mind move so fast and arrive somewhere so terrible. "Say it," he said. His voice had gone to the Arctic register, the one I'd only heard about, the one the city fears. And I understood I was seeing for the first time the man in the warehouse. "Say the whole thing, now." Marco's HLA type is consistent with him being Sophia's father. And yours, I made myself say it, doctor to father, the worst sentence of my career. Yours is not. Sal, the typing is definitive. You are not Sophia's biological father. Marco is. I have witnessed a great deal of human pain. It is my job to be in the room for it.
I have never witnessed anything like what happened to Salvatore Greco's face in the next 10 seconds. It did not break the way it had broken before, softly, boyishly. It did something worse. It went utterly, perfectly still. And behind the stillness, I watched a man's entire understanding of his own life detonate, silently, completely, and rearrange itself into a shape made entirely of blades. "Angela," he said finally. Just the name. "I don't know how," I said. "I don't know what happened. I only know what the blood says." He sat down. He, who didn't sit down for good news or bad, sat down, slowly, like an old man, and he put his face in his hands, and Salvatore Greco, for the length of perhaps 30 seconds, came apart. Then he put himself back together, and when he lifted his face, it was the warehouse face, and I was, I confess, afraid. 10 years, he said. He sat at her bed for 10 years. Card tricks. Uncle Marco. He held her the day I brought her home from the hospice. He was the first person I called. His voice was terrible in its evenness. He knew. He had to know. You don't father a child and not. Angela came to me 10 months after Angela and I. He stopped. He was doing the same math I'd been doing all night, the ruthless arithmetic of betrayal. She was with Marco, at the same time, or instead. She told me the baby was mine because... His jaw worked. Because I was the boss. Because a boss's child is protected. Because Marco was nobody yet in those days. She picked me. She lied to me. And Marco... You don't know Marco knew, I said, though I didn't believe it. He knew, Sal said, with total certainty. Look at how he loves her. That's not an uncle. I've seen him with our cousins' kids. That's a father who let another man raise his child because it was safer and easier and because his brother would kill him if he ever found out. He stood. Which his brother is now going to have to decide whether to do. Sal, she needs his marrow, he said, and there was the whole horror of it laid bare in one sentence. My daughter, the daughter I raised, the daughter I love more than my life, whatever the blood says she is my daughter, needs the marrow of the man who betrayed me to live. I cannot kill him. I need him. I need his body intact and his blood healthy, and I need him in that donor chair. And I need to look at him every day between now and then and not... His hands closed into fists and opened again, deliberately. 10 years I trusted him. He was the one compartment I never sealed. I didn't understand that word then. Compartment. I understand it now. He turned to go, to find Marco, I realized, and my blood went cold, and I said the only thing that could stop him, which was the truth about Sophia's need. If you touch him, I said, if you so much as let him see your face wrong, he'll run. And if he runs, she has no donor, and if she has no donor, she dies. You want to save her? Then you swallow this. You swallow it whole, and you keep it down until she's saved. Then, I couldn't believe I was saying it, then do whatever your world does, but not 1 second before her marrow is in that child's body. Do you understand me? Her life is the leash on your rage. Hold it. He looked at me for a long, long moment.
And something in him, the thing that had let David live, the thing that had kept him from my door for 10 years, the thing that loved better than his nature, took hold. "Her life is the leash," he repeated quietly. "All right, I'll hold it." Then, low, wrecked, "You always could talk me back from the edge. Nobody else ever could. 20 years, and you're still the only one." He left to find his brother and to smile at him and to say nothing, an act of self-control that I think must have cost him more than any violence ever had. And I went to the lab to see if the second, worse truth was true. It was. The maternity comparison came back that afternoon. My blood against Sophia's, 99.99%. The daughter I had mourned for 11 years was alive and dying in a bed across the city, and I had promised in my kitchen to save her, not knowing she was mine. I did not cry 11 minutes. I did not cry at all. I sat in the lab with the report in my hands, and I felt the entire architecture of my grief, 11 years of it, the letters, the light, the supply closets, reorganize itself around a single, impossible fact. She lived. My storm-tempered girl lived. And someone had taken her from me and given her to Angela and told Sal she was Angela's, and I did not yet know who or how, but I was going to find out, and God help whoever it was, because I had discovered that afternoon that I am not only a doctor, I am also, it turns out, my father's daughter and my daughter's mother, and there is a warehouse in me too. From the Diary of Teresa Colombo, and the conversation that changed everything. I had 2 impossible truths now, and 1 impossible night to decide what to do with them. Truth 1. Marco is Sophia's biological father, and Sal has just learned it and is holding his rage on the leash of his daughter's life. Truth 2. I am Sophia's biological mother, which means Angela DeMarco never bore her at all, which means the entire origin story is a fabrication, which means someone engineered the substitution, took my child, whom I believed I'd lost at 9 weeks, and... No. That's where it breaks. My child died. I bled. Unless I made myself think it through as a doctor, because the doctor is the only part of me that can walk on this ground. What if I did not miscarry? What if I bled, spotting a threatened miscarriage, common, terrifying, and not always fatal to the pregnancy? And I, in my grief and terror and guilt over the appointment I'd fled, assumed the worst. I never confirmed it. That is the thing I have never let myself remember. I never went back to the clinic, never had the ultrasound, never confirmed the loss. I bled, and I decided it was over, and I fled Philadelphia for a residency rotation in Pittsburgh 3 days later, and I never looked back, because looking back meant looking at the warehouse and the appointment I couldn't keep, and the man I'd left. And it was easier to bury a child I wasn't even certain I'd lost. What if the pregnancy survived, and I, drowning in denial 300 miles away by the following week, simply refused to know it? What if I gave birth in Pittsburgh, alone, in the terrible dissociation of a woman who has convinced herself she is not pregnant, and I can't. Even now, writing it, I can't make that version cohere. A woman doesn't hide a birth from herself, does she? Or the other version, the one that makes me cold,
What if someone helped me not know? What if, in that lost Pittsburgh year I've spent a decade not examining, there were hands in it that weren't mine? I needed the truth, and there was only one living person who might hold a piece of it, and it was not Sal, and it was not Marco. It was Rosa. Rosa, the nanny who was not a nanny, who had scanned my waiting room like a bodyguard 5 years ago, who had loved Sophia from the first, who had been in that child's life longer than anyone but Sal. Rosa knew things. Nannies always know things. I found her in the hospital chapel of all places, a heavy-set woman on her knees before a rack of candles, and I sat down beside her, and I did not waste time. "Rosa," I said, "I know Sophia isn't Angela's." She went very still. Then she crossed herself, and she began, quietly, to weep. And I understood I'd been right, and that this woman had been carrying something for a decade the way I'd been carrying my letters. "You're her mother," Rosa whispered. "I knew it the day you walked into that exam room 5 years ago. I told Mr. Sal, I begged him. I said, 'That's the doctor, that's the one, look at the child's face.' But he wouldn't. He was so afraid of your world touching yours. He had it backwards. He thought he was protecting you." She was babbling, 10 years of secret pouring out. I only ever knew a piece. I swear on the Virgin. Angela was my cousin. She couldn't have children. She'd tried for years. It broke her. And there was a man who arranged things, a man Angela owed, and he came to her with a baby, a newborn girl. He said the mother was a girl in trouble who'd given her up, that it was all legal, papers and everything. Angela didn't ask. She wanted a child so badly she didn't ask. And then she got sick, and she gave the baby to Mr. Sal because the man had told her the baby's father was connected to the Grecos, that it belonged with them. "What man?" I said. My voice did not sound like mine. "Rosa. What was his name?" Rosa looked at me with her wet, ruined face, and she said a name, and the chapel tilted. Because the man who arranged things, the man who had brought Angela a newborn girl 11 years ago and told her the mother was a girl in trouble, the fixer who trafficked in the disposal and placement of inconvenient human beings, was a man who had in those days worked for the Greco family, a man named Tommy Ferro. And Tommy Ferro, in the autumn 11 years ago, had been running an operation out of Pittsburgh, the very city I'd fled to, the very year. I did not miscarry. I know that now. I bled and I fled to Pittsburgh, and somewhere in the lost, dissociated fog of that year, a fog I've never examined, a year I have no clear memories of, which I attributed to grief and overwork, somewhere in there I had a baby, and someone took her. A girl in trouble, alone, in denial, 300 miles from anyone who knew her, exhausted past reason by a brutal residency. How hard would it have been? A woman that isolated, that broken, that determined not to know her own condition. I don't remember. That's the horror I have to live with. I don't remember giving birth to my own daughter. Whatever was done to me, or whatever I did to myself, in the deepest denial a mind can construct, took the memory too. But the blood doesn't lie. Sophia is mine. And the chain that carried her from my body to Angela's arms, to Sal's house, ran straight through the Greco family's own fixer. Which means it was Greco business. Which means somewhere in the organization Sal now runs, someone 11 years ago handled the disappearance of Salvatore Greco's own child by the woman he loved, and either didn't know whose child it was, or did, and buried it.
And Marco. Marco is the biological father. Marco, who was nobody yet 11 years ago, a young man in the organization, close to Tommy Ferro's world. The pieces were too big to hold. I sat in the chapel with Rosa weeping beside me, and I understood that the truth was not one betrayal, but a nest of them, coiled together for a decade, and that at the center of the nest was a 10-year-old girl who needed her biological father's marrow to live, and that her biological father had betrayed her adoptive father, who was also her mother's lost love, and that her mother was her doctor, and that none of them had known, and all of it was about to come out. And the only thing holding the whole structure together was the child's survival. Her life is the leash on all of us. I left the chapel. I went to find Sal, because he had to know the second truth now, that Sophia was mine, and I had to be the one to tell him, and I had no idea, none, how a man already holding one betrayal on the leash of his daughter's life would hold a second revelation that turned his adopted daughter into the living child of the only woman he'd ever loved. I found him at the window of Sophia's room, watching her sleep, and I closed the door behind me, and I said, "Sal, there's more, and you have to sit down for this one. You really do." Philadelphia, Sophia's room, night. He didn't sit down. I'd known he wouldn't. "Tell me," he said. So I told him. I had rehearsed it walking down the corridor, and every rehearsal fell apart. So in the end, I just gave it to him plainly, the way you give a diagnosis, because there's no gentle way, and pretending there is only makes it crueler. "Sophia is mine," I said, "biologically. I ran a maternity comparison this afternoon. My blood against hers. It's a match. 99.99%. I watched it not land, watched it refuse to land, and I said it again, differently. The daughter you've raised for 10 years is my daughter, Sal. Mine. And..." My voice finally broke. After holding all day, it broke here. "And yours. In every way that isn't blood, because you're the only father she's ever known. But biologically, she's mine. And Marco's." Salvatore Greco looked at me across his sleeping daughter's bed, and I watched the third catastrophe in 2 days hit a man who had already survived 2, and for a moment I thought it would be the one that finished him. "That's not possible," he said. Teresa, you'd have been pregnant when you left me. I would have known. I watched you. And then he stopped, because he was doing the math too, the same math, the September math, and I watched him land on it the way I'd landed on it in the lab. "The beach house," he said. "The beach house. You were pregnant when you left me." His voice was almost inaudible. "You were carrying my child, and you left anyway. Because of the warehouse. Because of what I am." He turned away, toward the window, and his shoulders, those shoulders I'd loved, that I'd leaned on, that had carried his whole terrible world, curved inward. "You'd rather have raised her alone than raise her with me. You looked at me and my world, and you decided our child was safer without a father than with one who was..." "No," I said. "Sal, no. That's not. It's worse than that. Listen to me." And I told him the rest. The clinic I fled, the bleeding, the certainty that I'd lost her, 11 years believing my child was dead, the letters, the light I leave on, the 11 minutes, always 11, the number of weeks. I told this dangerous man the softest, most shameful, most guarded truth of my entire life, standing in a hospital room, and I watched his face change from devastation to something else, something I hadn't expected. Grief. For me. "You thought she died," he said slowly,
You've grieved her for 11 years. You didn't leave to keep her from me. You left to protect her, and then you lost her. And you've been mourning our daughter alone this whole time, writing me letters." His voice cracked on the word. The letters. "You were writing to me about her. About a child we both thought was—" He couldn't finish. "I didn't know she was in the letters," I whispered. "I didn't let myself. But yes, she was always in the letters. The 11 minutes, the name I couldn't cross out. Sophia. I met her 5 years ago in my own exam room, and I knew, some animal part of me knew, and I called it madness." We stood there, the two of us, on opposite sides of the bed where our daughter slept. 11 years of separate grief collapsing into one shared, impossible, terrible, luminous fact. She lived. Our girl lived. We had not lost her. She had been alive the whole time, taken from us by forces we were only beginning to understand, raised by the man who loved her mother, fathered by blood by the brother who'd betrayed him. "How?" Sal said. "How did she get from you in Pittsburgh to Angela?" And I told him the last piece. Rosa, Tommy Ferro, the fixer who'd worked for the Grecos, running an operation in Pittsburgh 11 years ago, who'd brought Angela a newborn and called the mother a girl in trouble. I watched Salvatore Greco understand that his own organization, the machine his father built, the machine he now commanded, had processed the disappearance of his own child. That somewhere in the chain of hands that carried our daughter away from me, there were Greco hands. That the thing he'd spent his life running had eaten his own future and fed it to his brother. "Tommy Ferro," he said, and the Arctic came down over him again, total, and I understood that Tommy Ferro was, from that moment, a dead man, whatever else happened. "Sal." I came around the bed. I did the thing I had not done in 11 years, the thing we'd both been so careful to avoid, the thing we'd known would end our restraint. I touched him. I put my hand on his arm, over the expensive dark suit, and I felt him go rigid and then, slowly, shudder. "Not now. Whatever you're going to do, not now. Sophia first, everything else after. She needs Marco's marrow. She needs all of us holding the leash. We cannot come apart. Not yet." He turned, and then his arms were around me, and 11 years fell away entirely, and I was against his chest, with his face in my hair, and I felt him break, finally, all the way. The man the city feared, weeping silently into the hair of the woman he'd loved for 20 years, over the daughter they'd both lost, and both found, and might yet lose again. "She has your temper," he said into my hair, wrecked and almost laughing through it. "God, Teresa, I used to watch her rage, and I couldn't figure out where it came from. It's yours. It was you the whole time. I've been living with a piece of you for 10 years, and I didn't know." "I know," I said. "I know." And on the bed, Sophia stirred and opened her eyes and found us there, her doctor and her father, wrapped around each other and weeping. And instead of being frightened, my strange, grave girl looked at us for a long, considering moment, weighing it the way she weighed everything. And then she said, in a small, clear voice that broke what was left of both our hearts, "I knew it." "Knew what, tesoro?" Sal managed. "That she was important," Sophia said, looking at me. "You look at her like you look at me." She yawned, 10 years old and exhausted by a disease that was trying to kill her, indifferent to the earthquakes of the adults who loved her. Are you going to be my mum now? Because I've always wanted one. Uncle Marco said my real mum went to heaven, but I never believed him. I could tell he was lying. I can always tell when grown-ups are lying. I could not speak. I looked at Sal. He looked at me. And I crossed to the bed, and I sat on the edge of it, and I took my daughter's thin hand. My daughter's hand, the hand of the child I'd mourned for 11 years, and I said the truest thing I have ever said. Yes, I'm going to be your mum now. I'm going to be your mum for the rest of my life, and I'm never, ever going to lose you again.
Philadelphia. From Teresa's diary and the days of the harvest.
We told no one. That was the agonizing genius of the position we were in. The truth that could shatter the family was the same truth that, if it shattered too soon, would kill the child. So we became, Sal and I, conspirators in silence, keeping 3 secrets at once: that Sophia was mine, that Marco was her father, and that Sal knew both. All of it swallowed and held down by will, for the sake of a marrow harvest. Marco could not know that Sal knew. If Marco understood that his brother had discovered the betrayal, he might run. And even if he didn't run, the harvest requires a donor who is calm, healthy, cooperative, present. You cannot extract marrow from a man who thinks his brother is going to kill him the moment the needle comes out. So Sal had to smile at Marco. Sal had to embrace his brother and thank him and call him a hero and mean none of it, every day for the 2 weeks of workup and preparation. I have never watched anyone do anything harder. I have watched people endure amputations, deliver stillborn children, receive terminal diagnoses with a nod. I have never watched anything as hard as Salvatore Greco embracing his brother and saying, "You're saving her life. I'll never forget this," while behind his eyes the warehouse burned. Marco, for his part, was radiant. He threw himself into the donor process with an almost frightening zeal. The diet, the injections of growth factor to boost his marrow, the endless tests. "Whatever she needs," he kept saying, and I finally understood, watching him, the shape of his particular tragedy. Marco loved Sophia as a father, had always loved her as a father, had watched his brother raise his child, and had never been able to claim her. And now, at last, he could give her something no one else could be, for once, the one who saved her. He was so happy to be useful. It made me sick, and it made me pity him, in equal measure, and I hated that I pitied him, because I had my own rage now. This man had betrayed Sal, yes, but more than that, in a way Sal didn't fully feel yet, because the blood truth about me was so new. This man had fathered my daughter, my stolen daughter. I looked at Marco Greco doing card tricks at Sophia's bedside, and I thought, you knew. Rosa said you knew. You knew she was your child, and you let her be given away, and then showed up to save her, so you could finally be the hero. And I said nothing, because saying anything would risk the harvest, and the harvest was her life. The workup finished. Marco was cleared. The date was set. The night before the transplant, I did something I hadn't done in over 11 Octobers, and it wasn't October. I went home to Pine Street, and I opened the cedar box, and I took out all 10 letters, and I read them, every one, in order, a decade of my longing laid end to end, and I understood, finally, what they had always been. They were letters to a daughter I thought was dead, wearing the mask of letters to a man. Every 11-minute cry, every October.
Every line about the child I imagined, the girl with my temper, who lived in a house I invented with a garden like my father's. She was real. She had my temper. And tomorrow her biological father would give her the marrow that might save her. And none of them, not the child, not the donor, knew what I knew. I did not write an 11th letter. Instead, for the first time, I wrote to her, to Sophia, a letter I would actually give her some day, when she was grown, when all of this was long behind us, if we were lucky, if she lived. I told her everything, the beach house, the warehouse, the leaving, the years of grief, the exam room 5 years ago when I held her once and called the knowing madness. I told her I had never stopped loving a child I thought I'd lost. I told her the 11 minutes were for her, and I sealed it and put it in the cedar box on top of the 10, and I understood that the box had been waiting for that letter all along, that it was the letter all the others had been rehearsals for. Then I went to the hospital, because it was almost dawn, and it was the day. The harvest was routine. That is the strange mercy of medicine. The most emotionally cataclysmic days are often, technically, ordinary. Marco went under general anaesthetic. Dr. Weiss's team drew the marrow from the back of his pelvis with a large bore needle, again and again, filling the bag with the red-gold liquid that held Sophia's chance. Sal stood outside the OR the entire time, with his hands very still at his sides, watching through the glass as surgeons harvested salvation from the body of the man he'd sworn, silently, to destroy. "How do you do it?" I asked him, low, standing beside him at the glass. Watch him, need him, hate him, all at once. "Compartments," Sal said. "I told you once, a long time ago I told you. A man like me learns to seal off flooding compartments. Save the rest of the ship. Don't think about what's behind the door." He watched his brother's marrow fill the bag. Marco was the one compartment I never sealed. I loved him without a door. That's why this, his jaw worked, that's why this is the one that's going to sink me. There's no bulkhead. The water's everywhere. I took his hand. In front of the OR glass, in front of the nurses, I took Salvatore Greco's hand, and he let me, and we stood there while his brother bled for our daughter. Then they brought the marrow up to Sophia's room, and it went into her the way it goes in, not surgery, not drama, just an IV, a bag of red gold hanging on a pole, dripping into the port in her chest, the most anticlimactic miracle in medicine. New marrow, someone else's marrow, going in to replace the marrow that had turned traitor. Sophia watched it drip with her grave, considering eyes and said, "That's it? That's the big scary thing everyone's been crying about? It's just a bag." "It's just a bag," I agreed, and I could barely speak. "Uncle Marco's inside me now," she said, wondering. "That's so weird. His blood's going to make my blood." Sal, across the bed, went very still, and I understood that he was hearing in his 10-year-old daughter's innocent words the exact shape of the thing that had been done to him. His blood's going to make my blood. That Marco's blood had made her already, 11 years ago, in a betrayal Sal had only just learned. And now Marco's blood would remake her again, would live in her forever, would be, in the most literal biological sense, the thing that saved her. Sal would never be free of Marco now. Even destroying him wouldn't do it. Marco's marrow was in Sophia's bones. He was in her
forever. I saw Sal understand that, and I saw him decide something, and I didn't know yet what he'd decided. Now we waited. Engraftment, whether the new marrow takes, whether it settles into the bone and begins to make healthy blood, takes weeks. The counts drop to almost nothing first. The child becomes, briefly, a person with no immune system at all, kept alive in a sterile room, vulnerable to a single stray germ. Then, if it works, the numbers begin slowly to climb, day by day. A white blood cell count that goes from 0 to 1 to 5 to 50, each number a heartbeat, each number a prayer answered. We counted them together, Sal and I, on opposite sides of the sterile room glass, gowned and masked, our daughter between us, Marco's marrow doing its silent work in her bones. We counted the way I count everything, the way I'd counted the days in every letter. But this time we were counting up instead of down, counting toward life instead of away from love. And every morning when Dr. Weiss brought the numbers, I would look at Sal and he would look at me, and neither of us would breathe until the number was higher than yesterday. And every morning Marco came, pale from his own harvest, moving carefully, and stood at the glass and wept with joy at the numbers, at the child he'd fathered and could never claim, saved by the only gift he was ever allowed to give her. And every morning Sal embraced him and thanked him and held the leash and said nothing. And the truth sat in the room with all of us like a fourth person nobody would look at. The numbers climbed. Day 11, 11, always 11. The first new white cells appeared. The graft was taking. My daughter was going to live. And that was the day everything I had built to hold the truth down, finally, catastrophically, came apart. Because that was the day Marco found out that Sal knew. Philadelphia from Teresa's diary, and the night it broke open. It was Tommy Ferro who did it. Of course it was. Sal had not been able to fully seal the compartment marked Tommy Ferro, the fixer, the man whose hands had carried my daughter from Pittsburgh to Angela's arms. While we counted white cells at the glass, Sal had quietly, with the patience of a man who has waited his whole life, begun to pull the thread. And Tommy Ferro, feeling the thread pulled, feeling the boss's cold attention turn toward an 11-year-old sin, did what cornered men do. He went to the one person he thought could protect him. He went to Marco. I don't know exactly what was said. I've pieced it together since, from Sal, from Rosa, from the wreckage. But Ferro went to Marco and told him the boss was asking questions about the Pittsburgh baby, and Marco, who had spent 10 years terrified of exactly this, understood in one sick lurch that his brother knew. That the marrow that had matched too well had told the truth. That the smiles and embraces of the last 2 weeks had been a performance over an abyss. Marco called Sal, asked to meet. At the social club on Passyunk, the one with the green door, the one I'd sat outside in my grief a lifetime ago, not knowing it, watching for a face I couldn't recognize. Sal went. And Sal, God help him, told me where he was going, because we had stopped keeping secrets from each other somewhere in the counting of the white cells, and I followed him. I left my daughter sleeping in her sterile room with Rosa at the glass,
and I drove to South Philly, and I parked across from the green door, exactly where I'd parked 11 years ago. And this time I did not sit in the car. Because I had learned something in 11 years, and in the last 11 days most of all, that sitting in the car is how you lose everything. That the women in my family sit in cars watching doors while the men behind them decide our lives. That I was done with it. I went through the green door. There were men who tried to stop me, and I said, "I'm Sophia's mother, and I'm Salvatore Greco's doctor, and if you touch me, he'll kill you." And I don't know which claim did it, but they let me through, and I found them in the back room, the two brothers, and I walked in on the moment the compartment finally flooded. Marco was crying. Not the joyful weeping of the last 2 weeks, wrecked, terrified, a man who has run out of charm. Salvatore, let me explain. You have to let me explain. I didn't know. I swear on our mother, I didn't know Angela had her. I didn't know where she went. I only found out years later when you brought her home, when I saw her face and did the math, and I— You knew when you did card tricks at her bed, Sal said. The Arctic voice, the warehouse voice. He had a gun in his hand. I had never seen him hold a gun. In 3 years of loving him, I had never once seen it. And I understood that this was the man I'd fled. This was the warehouse. This was the thing I'd built my whole life to escape. And he was holding it loosely at his side. And it was the most frightening thing I had ever seen. More frightening than any raised weapon, because of how calm it was. You knew, Sal said, and you let me raise your child, and you called her your niece, and you took every gift of loving her that I gave her freely, and you never told me. 10 years! That's the part I can't. The sleeping with Angela, that was 11 years ago. We were young. I could, maybe. But the 10 years of knowing, the 10 years of sitting at my table, that's not a mistake, Marco. That's a decision you made every single day. Because you'd have killed me, Marco screamed. Look at you right now. You're standing there with a gun in your hand and you're asking me why I didn't tell you. This is why. Because the moment you knew, we'd be exactly here. And I couldn't leave her, Sal. I couldn't stop being near her. So I lied. I lied so I could stay in her life. I lied so I could watch my daughter grow up, even if I could never. He was sobbing. She's mine, and I could never say it. Every day. Do you understand what that's like? You got to be her father. I had to be her uncle. In my own— Stop, I said. Both of them turned. Neither had seen me come in. Teresa, Sal said, and something flickered across the Arctic, the old thing, the leash. You shouldn't be here. Go back to her. No, I said, and I walked into the middle of the room, between the gun and the man it was pointed at, my daughter's biological father and the only father she'd ever known, and I said the thing I had come to say, the thing that only I in the entire world had the standing to say, because I was the only person present whom both of them loved, and neither had betrayed. Sal, put the gun down. Not because he deserves it. I don't care what he deserves. I hate him too. He fathered my stolen daughter and let her be given away, and I would like to kill him myself. Put it down because of what's dripping into Sophia's bones right now, in a sterile room across this city, keeping her alive. His marrow, his blood. You pull that trigger and you murder the man whose cells are the only reason your daughter has an immune system. You murder the source of her graft.
If she rejects it, if she relapses, if she ever needs more, needs a second harvest, needs the one thing only his body can give, and you've put a bullet in that body. Sal's hand did not move. She asked me to be her mother, I said, quieter, 11 days ago. She looked at us over that bed and she asked me to be her mum, and I said yes, and I said I would never lose her again.
I have lost her once, Sal. I lost her for 11 years. I will not lose you to a prison, and I will not lose the donor she may still need, and I will not raise our daughter in a family that has a murder at the centre of it. She'll feel it. Children feel these things. She can already tell when grown-ups are lying. She told me so herself. Do you want her to grow up in a house built over her uncle's grave? The gun stayed level. Marco was on his knees now, silent, hands over his face. There is no clean version of this, I said. There's no version where any of us is innocent. You raised another man's child. I lost my own and didn't look for her. He betrayed you and stayed. Angela lied. Pharaoh trafficked her. We are all guilty of something, and the only innocent person in this entire story is a 10-year-old girl who has your marrow and my temper, and needs every single one of us alive and out of prison and not at war. I took a breath. So put it down, and let's go be the thing she needs, which is a family, a broken, terrible, guilty family, but alive, all of us, for her. The room was silent for a very long time. And then Salvatore Greco, the man the city feared, the man whose rivals stopped existing, the man I had fled a lifetime ago for holding a gun in a warehouse, looked at me, and looked at his brother on his knees, and looked at nothing, at the middle distance where I think he was seeing his daughter's face, and slowly, slowly, he lowered the gun. "Get out," he said to Marco. Not a scream, a whisper, worse than a scream. "Get out of this city tonight. Go somewhere I can't see you. If she needs you, if she ever needs your marrow again, I'll call, and you'll come, and you'll give it, and then you'll leave again. That's the deal. That's the only deal. You stay alive because she might need you. You stay away because I can't look at you. And you never, ever tell her what you are to her. That's mine to decide, and hers, and Teresa's, not yours. You gave up the right to any of it the first day you did a card trick at her bed and called yourself her uncle." His voice cracked finally, once. "Goodbye, Marco." And Marco Greco got up off his knees and looked at his brother, and looked at me, and looked, for the last time in a long time, in the direction of the hospital where his daughter's blood was learning to save itself with his gift inside it, and he walked out the green door into the dark, and he was gone. Sal stood there with the gun hanging from his hand. I crossed to him. I took the gun, he let me, and I set it on the table, and I put my arms around him, and this time he didn't break. This time he just held on, the way a drowning man holds on, the way you hold the one anchor point of the only leash that ever held you. "You talked me back from the edge," he said into my hair. "Again." "That's my job now," I said. "One of them." From the diary of Teresa Colombo, the weeks after. She lived. I want to write that as many times as there are days I thought she wouldn't. She lived. The graft took.
The white cells climbed day after day past the danger into the safe country. The marrow Marco left behind in her bones, the one gift he was permitted to give, the gift that would outlast his banishment, that would be part of her for the rest of her life, did its silent, generous work, and made her blood and my daughter, whom I mourned for 11 years, came back from the edge of death. Dr. Weiss used the word cure eventually. He used it carefully, the way careful men use enormous words, with caveats and follow-up schedules and the sober statistics of relapse. But he used it, and I heard it, and I went into the supply closet at the hospital, and I cried. Not 11 minutes. I timed it out of old habit. 40 minutes. The 11-minute cries were for a child I thought was dead. This was a 40-minute cry for a child who was alive, and it was the best 40 minutes of my life. We told her the truth. Not all of it, not Marco, not yet. That's a truth for when she's grown, a truth Sal and I have agreed to hold until she's strong enough to choose what to do with it. But the part that mattered, that I am her mother, her biological mother, that I didn't give her away, that I lost her, that I looked for her. I let myself have that small grace in the telling. I said I looked for her, and Sal didn't correct me. And maybe it's even true. Maybe 11 years of letters and a folder of clippings and a name I couldn't cross out was a kind of looking, and that I found her, and that I'm never leaving. She took it the way she takes everything, gravely, weighing it. And then she said, "So Papa's not my real dad?" And Sal, sitting on the edge of her bed, said the truest thing I've ever heard him say. "I'm the realest dad you'll ever have. The blood doesn't make it, the nights make it. The bad dreams and the fevers and the 10,000 bottles I warmed and the fact that I would burn down the world for you, that makes it. Blood is just chemistry, tesoro. I'm your father because I chose you every single day, and I'll keep choosing you. That's what a father is." And Sophia looked at him, my grave girl, and she said, "Okay, then I have 2 real parents. That's more than most people get." And she went back to her book, and Sal and I looked at each other over her scarfed head, the hair growing back now, dark, soft as down, and I understood that children are so much braver than the adults who are terrified of frightening them. We are a family now. I still cannot quite write it without my hand shaking, but it's true. A broken, terrible, guilty family, exactly as I named it in the back room of the club with a gun on the table. But a family. Sophia has a mother and a father and a house in Chestnut Hill with too many cameras and men who look like gardeners. And I have not moved in, not yet, because I have not yet decided how much of Sal's world I can live inside. And that is a truth I'm still writing my way toward. Because here is the thing I have to be honest about, even now, even in the middle of joy. Salvatore Greco is still Salvatore Greco. I stood in that back room and watched him hold a gun on his own brother. I know now, with my own eyes and not through newsprint, what he is. The warehouse I fled 11 years ago is not gone. It's just that I now stand on the other side of the door because our daughter is inside the house. I asked him about it. One night, on the terrace of the penthouse above the Black River, Sophia asleep inside, I asked him the question I'd been carrying. Can you stop? Get out? For her? For... I couldn't quite say for me, even then. And he was quiet for a long time, watching the river. And then he said, "My father tried to get out once. You know how that ended? I didn't. It didn't. There's no out, Teresa. Not the way you mean. Not a clean door I walk through into an ordinary life. But there's... He searched for it, the articulate, dangerous man, searching, the way he'd searched for how to describe coming up for air. There's less. There's stepping back. There's putting men between me and the parts that would touch her. There's spending the rest of my life making the world she lives in as clean as I can make it, even knowing I can never make it clean.
That's the most honest thing I can promise you. Not that I'll be good, that I'll be less. For her, for you. That I'll spend every day being less than my nature, the way I've only ever managed to be around you. It wasn't the promise I wanted. It was, I think, the only true promise he was capable of making. And I have learned that a true small promise is worth more than a beautiful false one. David made me beautiful promises. Sal has never once lied to me. That has to count for something. I have decided to let it count for something. The letters are done. I burned 9 of them on the terrace in a copper bowl the night after we brought Sophia home. 9 years of longing addressed to a silence, gone up in smoke over the Delaware. I kept the 10th, the last one, the one with the line he'd asked me to say aloud. You ruined me for restful. I kept that one because it's true and because it's the bridge between the woman who wrote it and the woman I am now. And I kept the 11th, the one to Sophia. That one goes back in the cedar box to wait for the day she's grown and ready for the whole terrible, beautiful truth about the beach house and the warehouse and Marco and the years I thought she was gone. I'll give it to her then. It's the only letter I ever wrote that I always intended to send. Philadelphia and the Shore, late summer 2025. He took us to the beach house. I didn't know he still had it. The house at Ocean City where we spent the last night 11 years ago, where, we know now, we made her. He'd kept it all this time. Never sold it, never rented it, never went there. I couldn't, he said when I asked, and I couldn't let it go. So it just sat there, like everything else about you. I couldn't have it, and I couldn't let it go. Sophia loved the ocean instantly, the way children do, running at the waves and shrieking back from them, her hair grown out to a soft dark cap now, whipping in the salt wind. She was thin still and tired easily, and I watched her the way I will watch her for the rest of my life, counting, always counting her breaths and her colour and her energy. But she was alive and running on a beach and screaming with joy at cold water, and I stood on the deck of the house where I'd lost and made her in a single night, and I thought my heart would simply stop from the fullness of it. Sal came and stood beside me. Not touching. He'd gotten so used to not touching me all those weeks that we were still relearning it. And then, deliberately, he did touch me, put his arm around me the way he had on this same shore 11 years ago in the photograph I keep in a drawer, and I leaned into him and we watched our daughter play. I used to imagine this, he said, the 3 of us. Before I knew she was yours, before I knew any of it, I used to imagine bringing her here, and there was always a woman in the picture, and I never let myself see the woman's face, because I knew whose face it was, and I couldn't afford to know it. He was quiet. It was always you, even when I told myself it couldn't be. It was always your face I wouldn't let myself see. I imagined children, I said, in every letter. A girl with my temper, in a house with a garden like my father's. I invented her because I thought the real one was gone, and she was here the whole time. She was here, Sal, on this exact beach. Started right here. We were both crying a little, the easy tears of people who have cried so much they've made peace with it, watching our daughter chase a seagull down the sand. "Marry me," he said. I turned to look at him. He was not on one knee. There was no ring in a robin's egg box. He said it the way he'd said everything true to me across 20 years, plainly, without performance, a man stating a fact he'd already decided. "I know what I am," he said. "I know I'm asking you to marry the warehouse. I know I can't promise you clean. I've told you the most I can promise is less. But I've loved you since a library in 2005, and I've loved you every single day of the 11 years you thought I'd forgotten you. And I raised our daughter without knowing she was ours, because some part of me must have known that anything I loved that much had to have you in it somewhere. Marry me. Not because it's safe, it isn't. Because it's true. Because we already made a family on this beach 11 years ago, and it took us this long to find each other again. And I don't want to waste whatever we have left pretending we can live apart." I thought about David and the symphony and the coat held gently and the beautiful false promises of ordinary men. I thought about the light I'd left on for 11 years, and the 11-minute cries, and the folder of clippings, and the name I couldn't cross out. I thought about a gun in a back room, and a brother on his knees, and the Arctic in this man's eyes. And I thought about the same man warming 10,000 bottles at 3 in the morning, singing his mother's songs to a colicky infant, being less than his nature every day, for the sake of a child he thought he had no blood claim to. I thought about the truth I'd known since a library in 2005, the truth I'd fled and mourned and written a decade of letters around, that I would never, in any other man's arms, forget to breathe. "Yes," I said. Sophia came pelting up the beach, sandy and breathless and radiant, and threw herself between us, and looked up at both our faces, reading us the way she reads everyone, and she said, "You're being weird again." "Your mother just agreed to marry me," Sal said. Sophia considered this, weighed it. And then, my grave girl, my little storm, my miracle who came back from the dead with another man's marrow in her bones and my temper in her blood, broke into a grin exactly like her father's, like Sal's, I mean, the only father she'll ever call by that name, and said, "Finally, I've been telling everyone for weeks." And she took my hand, and she took his, and she stood between us on the beach where she began, the child who was lost and found, the answer to 11 years of letters, and we walked back up toward the house as the sun went down over the water, 3 people made out of secrets and grief and blood and choice, a broken, terrible, guilty, luminous family, alive, all of us, together. That night, after Sophia slept, I did not leave the light on. For the first time in 11 years, I slept in the dark, in the house where she was made, with the sound of the ocean through the open windows and Sal's arm around me. And I did not dream of the warehouse. I did not dream of anything, I remember. I only slept, deep and whole, and woke to grey light and salt air
and the certain knowledge that the thing I'd been afraid of in the dark had never been out there at all. It had been the emptiness where my daughter should have been. And she was down the hall, breathing, alive, mine. I did not need the light any more. From the cedar box opened many years later. My darling Sophia, you are 18 now, and you are reading this because I promised your father and myself that on the day you were grown, I would give you the whole truth.
All of it, the parts that are beautiful and the parts that are terrible, because you have always been able to tell when grown-ups are lying, and I refuse to be one of the grown-ups who lies to you. So here is everything. I met your father in a library when I was 19. He told me I'd underlined the wrong passage in Dante, the one about being forgiven. I've thought about that a great deal over the years, my love, because forgiveness turned out to be the whole story in the end. I left him when I was 22 because I discovered what his family was, and I was afraid, and I ran. What I didn't know when I ran was that I was carrying you. What I told myself 3 weeks later, when I began to bleed and I was young and terrified and 300 miles away, was that I had lost you. I believed that for 11 years, Sophia. I mourned you every October. I wrote letters to your father that I never sent, and I understand now that they were really letters to you, to the daughter I thought was gone. I left a light on every night because I couldn't bear the dark where you should have been. I did not lose you. You were taken through a chain of hands I've since made sure can never hurt anyone again, and given to a woman named Angela who could not have children and loved you as her own until she died. And then to your father, who raised you believing you were his by blood, and loved you so completely that when I finally met you again, in a hospital, dying, I promised to save you before I knew you were mine. Then I found out you were mine. And I found out other things too. Things about our family, about your uncle, about betrayals 11 years deep. And I want you to know that when you're ready to ask about all of it, I will tell you every word, and so will your father, and you can decide for yourself what to feel and whom to forgive. That will be your Dante passage to underline, my love, yours to choose. But here is what I need you to know first, before any of the terrible parts. Your father is not your father by blood. He is your father by every night he sat up with you, every fever he broke, every bottle he warmed, every day he chose you when he had no blood reason to. He told you once, when you were 10, that blood is just chemistry and the nights are what make it. He was right. He is the best father I have ever seen, and he became it by pure choice, which is the only way anyone ever really becomes anything. And I am your mother. Not because I bore you, though I did, in a year I can barely remember, alone and afraid. I am your mother because I never once stopped loving you, even when I thought you were only a ghost, because the letters were always to you, because the 11 minutes were always for you, because a piece of me was reaching for you across a whole decade, in the dark, with the light on, and it turned out the piece of me was right, and you were out there, breathing, becoming the extraordinary person you are. You have my temper. I'm sorry and I'm not sorry. My father called it piccola tempesta, little storm. Wear it well. A woman needs a storm in her to walk through this family and stay herself. You have your father's stillness too, and his brother's dark eyes. Yes, we'll talk about that when you're ready. And your own thing entirely, that gravity,
That way of weighing everyone before you decide they're worth your words. You've had it since you were 5 years old, on an exam table, in a room where I held you once and called the knowing madness. You've always been exactly yourself. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever watched happen. We are not a simple family, my love. You know that better than anyone. Your father is what he is, though he has spent your whole life being less than his nature, for your sake and mine. And that effort, that daily, unglamorous, unwinnable effort to be less than the thing he was built to be, is the truest love I know.
There is danger in our world.
There is a green door in South Philly, and men who look like gardeners, and a great deal we don't talk about at dinner. I made my peace with it the day I walked through that green door myself, to stand between your father and the worst version of himself. Because I had learned that the women in our family don't sit in cars anymore, watching doors. We go through them. Go through them, Sophia. All of them. Underline whatever passage you choose. I kept every one of these truths in a cedar box your grandfather built me, waiting for the day you were old enough to hold them. There were other letters once, 10 of them, a decade of my grief. But I burned 9 on the terrace the night we brought you home, because I didn't need them anymore.
The 10th I kept, and this 11th, the only letter I ever wrote that I always meant to send. It's yours now. All of it is yours now. The grief and the joy and the terrible, beautiful truth, and the family that fought its way back to itself just in time to save your life. You asked me once, when you were 10 and dying and braver than all of us, if I would be your mother now. I said yes, and I said I would never lose you again. I have kept that promise every single day. It is the only promise I have ever kept perfectly. I love you. I always did, even in the dark, even with the light on, even when I thought you were gone. Welcome to the whole truth, my little storm. Come find me when you've finished reading. I'll be right down the hall. I'm not going anywhere. I never was. Your mother, always, Teresa downstairs, in the house in Chestnut Hill, with its too many cameras and its gardeners who are not gardeners. A man who was once the most feared name in Philadelphia sat at a kitchen table, warming his hands around a cup of coffee, listening to his daughter's footsteps overhead go still, the sound of a girl finishing a letter, and then start again, faster, coming down the stairs, and he looked up as she came into the room with her mother's storm in her eyes and 11 years of truth in her hands. And he opened his arms, because he had learned at last the one thing his father never taught him, that you do not seal the compartment where you keep the ones you love. You leave the door open. You leave the light on until you don't need it anymore. And you choose them every single day for the rest of your life.